The bounty hunter's bullet found its mark before the bank robber's finger could pull the trigger. One shot, one kill, no mercy. Ethan Cole had built his reputation on cold precision and colder justice, a man more feared than trusted in every town from Carson City to Virginia City. But when a sharp-eyed woman in mourning black offered him a devil's bargain, marry her for 1 year, save her ranch, take his blood money and disappear, he discovered that some contracts cut deeper than any bullet wound. Because pretending to love someone is easy. Realizing it stopped being pretend? That's where the real danger begins. If you're ready for a story of vengeance, deception, and the love that rewrites both, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels across the frontier and beyond. The Nevada sun beat down on Silver Ridge like a punishment from an indifferent sky, turning the dirt streets into rivers of dust and the wooden storefronts into tinder waiting for a match. It was the kind of heat that made men mean and desperate, the kind that turned minor grudges into blood feuds and small crimes into hanging offenses. Ethan Cole didn't mind the heat. He'd learned long ago that discomfort kept a man sharp, and sharp was the only way to stay alive in his line of work. He stood in the shadow of the Silver Ridge Bank, one shoulder pressed against the sun-warm boards, his hat pulled low enough to shade his eyes, but not low enough to restrict his vision. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another drifter waiting out the worst of the afternoon heat. They didn't notice the way his hand rested loose and ready near the Colt revolver at his hip, or the way his gaze tracked every person who entered or exited the bank's heavy doors. Ethan had been watching for 3 days now, following a tip that had cost him $20 and a bruised set of knuckles. The Garrett brothers, 3 career criminals with a taste for small-town banks and a habit of leaving bodies behind, were planning to hit Silver Ridge. The local sheriff had laughed when Ethan brought him the information. "Let 'em try," the fat man had said, tobacco juice staining the corner of his mouth. "We got 2 deputies and a safe that ain't been cracked in 10 years. Ethan hadn't argued. Dead lawmen didn't collect bounties, and he had no interest in splitting the reward money 3 ways. So he'd taken up his position and waited with the patience of a man who'd learned that hurrying only got you killed. The bank doors swung open just after 2 o'clock, and Ethan's body went still in the way of a predator that spotted prey. 3 men emerged, dusty trail clothes, rifles poorly concealed under long coats despite the heat, nervous eyes that darted left and right but never up. Amateurs trying to look professional. The Garretts had gotten sloppy. They mounted their horses with the jerky movements of men running on fear and bad whiskey. The youngest one, Bobby Garrett, wanted for murder in 3 territories, kept touching his coat where the rifle barrel poked against the fabric. The oldest, Jack, sat his horse with the false confidence of a man who'd gotten lucky too many times and forgotten what real danger looked like. Ethan let them get 20 feet down the street before he stepped away from the wall. "Garrett!" His voice cut through the afternoon quiet like a knife through silk. All 3 men froze. Horses stamped and snorted, sensing the sudden tension. Men and women on the boardwalk scattered, disappearing into doorways and behind barrels, with the practiced efficiency of people who'd learned to recognize the prelude to violence. Jack Garrett turned his horse slowly, his hand already moving toward his rifle. "Who's asking?" "Man with a piece of paper says you're worth $3,000. Ethan's hand hung loose at his side, relaxed but ready. "Doesn't specify dead or alive, which means I got options." "Bounty hunter." The middle brother, Thomas, spat the words like a curse. "Shoulda known. You got a name?" "Ethan Cole." The effect was immediate and gratifying. All 3 men went rigid in their saddles. Even the horses seemed to sense the shift, ears flattening, hooves shuffling nervously against the packed earth. Ethan's reputation had preceded him, as it usually did. 37 confirmed kills in 4 years, each one clean, each one legal, each one adding another layer to the legend of the man who never missed and never showed mercy. "Cole," Jack licked his lips, trying to calculate odds that didn't favor him no matter how he figured them. "Heard you don't take prisoners." "Heard right." Ethan's eyes were cold, flat, emotionless as a snake's. "But I'm in a generous mood today. You boys drop those rifles real slow, climb down from those horses, and walk yourselves to the sheriff's office. I'll let you keep breathing. Try anything else." He shrugged. "Well, 3,000 splits the same as 1,500. Arithmetic don't much matter to a dead man." For a moment, the street held its breath. Dust motes danced in the slanting sunlight. A dog barked somewhere distant. A woman's laugh drifted from the saloon, incongruous and surreal. Bobby Garrett's nerve broke first. His hand jerked toward the rifle under his coat, a movement born of panic rather than strategy. Ethan's Colt cleared leather in a motion too fast to follow, the hammer falling before Bobby's fingers even touched wood. The shot cracked across the afternoon like breaking bone, and Bobby Garrett pitched backward off his horse, a red flower blooming in the center of his chest. The horse bolted. Bobby hit the ground and didn't move. Thomas Garrett screamed something incoherent and went for his gun. Ethan's second shot caught him in the throat, turning the scream into a wet gurgle. He clutched at his neck, blood pumping between his fingers, then slowly toppled sideways out of the saddle. Jack Garrett sat frozen on his horse, hands spread wide, eyes huge with terror. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Jesus Christ, don't shoot! Rifle! On the ground! Now!" Ethan's voice hadn't changed, still flat and cold, discussing murder with the same inflection a man might use to order coffee. Jack's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the rifle twice before he managed to toss it into the dirt. He dismounted like a man stepping off a cliff, knees nearly buckling when his boots hit solid ground. "Walk." Ethan gestured with the Colt toward the sheriff's office. "Try to run. I put one in your spine. You'll live, but you'll wish you hadn't." Jack walked. Behind them, people were emerging from their hiding places, gathering around the bodies with the morbid fascination of spectators at a hanging. Ethan heard the whispers following him down the street, the same whispers that followed him everywhere. Ethan Cole. The ghost. The executioner. 39 now, ain't it? Heard he killed a man in Tombstone just for looking at him wrong. Heard he don't sleep, don't drink, don't do nothing but hunt. Heard he's got a list, and once you're on it, you're already dead. The sheriff met them at the door of his office, face pale, tobacco forgotten. He took one look at Jack Garrett's terrified expression and Ethan's cold eyes and stepped aside without a word. Ethan shoved Jack into a cell, locked it, and dropped the key on the sheriff's desk. "2 bodies in the street," he said. "Bounty paperwork's at the telegraph office. I'll collect tomorrow." He was halfway back to his horse when he heard the footsteps behind him. Light steps, purposeful, belonging to someone who'd made up their mind about something and wasn't going to be deterred. Ethan's hand drifted toward his gun before he turned. The woman was young, mid-20s, he guessed, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes the color of creek water in winter. She wore black from collar to hem, mourning clothes that looked expensive even covered in trail dust. Her face was angular, sharp-featured, pretty in a stern sort of way. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. They held the kind of determined desperation Ethan had seen in men about to make very bad decisions. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was steady, educated, with the faint trace of Eastern refinement that the frontier hadn't quite scrubbed away. "I need to speak with you. It's urgent." "Lady, I'll pay you $5,000. Ethan stopped. 5,000 was serious money. The kind of money that bought information or silence or made problems disappear permanently. He studied her more carefully, noting the way she held herself, straight-backed despite obvious exhaustion, chin up despite whatever fear was driving her. Quality fabric on those mourning clothes, expensive boots under the dust, hands that showed work but not hardship. "For what?" he asked. "1 year of your time." She met his gaze without flinching, and Ethan felt a reluctant flicker of respect. Most people couldn't hold eye contact with him for more than a few seconds. "I need a husband, temporarily, and you need money for something you're not willing to talk about, but willing to kill for. I think we can help each other." Around them, the street had gone quiet. People were watching, trying to look like they weren't watching, desperate to hear what the mysterious woman in black wanted with Silver Ridge's most recent executioner. "There's a restaurant 2 blocks south," the woman continued, her voice low enough that the eavesdroppers would get nothing useful. "The Nevada Rose. Meet me there in 1 hour. Hear my proposal. If you're not interested, you walk away and we never speak again." She didn't wait for an answer, just turned and walked away with the kind of confidence that suggested she was used to being obeyed. Ethan watched her go, his mind already working through angles and implications. $5,000. A year of his time. A temporary husband. It smelled like trouble, the complicated kind that usually ended with someone dead and someone else in jail. But $5,000 would fund a lot of tracking, a lot of bribes, a lot of the things he needed to find the man he'd been hunting for 3 years. The man who destroyed everything Ethan had once called family. The man whose death was the only thing that mattered anymore. He climbed onto his horse and rode toward the boarding house where he'd rented a room. He had an hour to clean the gun smoke off his hands and decide if he was desperate enough to hear what the woman in black was selling. Turned out, he was. The Nevada Rose was the kind of restaurant that catered to Silver Ridge's wealthier citizens. White tablecloths, actual glass in the windows, a menu that went beyond beans and salt pork. Ethan felt out of place the moment he walked through the door, aware of the dried blood still on his boots and the way the other diners' conversations died when they saw him. The woman in black sat at a corner table back to the wall, positioned where she could see the entire room. Smart. Ethan approved despite himself. He crossed to her table and sat without being invited, noting the way her hands remained visible on the table. No sudden movements, nothing to suggest a trap. "Mr. Cole?" She gestured to the chair across from her. "Thank you for coming." "You're buying dinner?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I'm buying whatever you want if you agree to my proposal. But let's start with introductions. My name is Clara Whitmore. 6 weeks ago, my father died and left me the Whitmore Ranch, 12,000 acres, 2,000 head of cattle, and enough debt to bury a smaller operation 3 times over." Ethan said nothing, just watched her with the same flat attention he'd give a card player trying to bluff. Clara didn't seem bothered by his silence. "My father was a good rancher, but a terrible businessman," she continued. "He borrowed money from Raymond Hartwell at the Cattlemen's Bank to expand the operation, thinking beef prices would hold. They didn't. Now Hartwell owns paper on most of the ranch, and he's made it clear he intends to collect, one way or another." "So sell," Ethan said. "Take what you can get and move on." "I would, except for 2 problems. Clara's jaw tightened. "First, my father's will stipulates that the ranch can't be sold for 5 years unless I'm married. He thought he was protecting me from making rash decisions in grief. Instead, he created a cage. And the second problem? Hartwell doesn't want to wait 5 years. He wants the ranch now, and he's willing to use intimidation, sabotage, and worse to force my hand. Last week, someone cut our fence lines and scattered 200 head. 3 nights ago, our foreman was beaten so badly he can't work. Yesterday, I received a letter suggesting that a young woman running a ranch alone might meet with an unfortunate accident." Ethan leaned back in his chair, understanding dawning. "You need protection." "I need more than protection. I need legitimacy." Clara's voice dropped lower, urgent now. "If I'm married, my husband controls the ranch according to Nevada law. Hartwell can't touch it without going through him. If that husband is someone Hartwell fears, someone with a reputation for not being intimidated, he'll back off long enough for me to sell the ranch properly, pay the debts, and walk away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else." "Why me?" "Because you're the most dangerous man in 3 territories, and everyone knows it. Because you don't have ties to this town or any reason to be bought off. Because you killed 2 men in the street this afternoon without blinking, and that's exactly the kind of reputation I need standing between me and Raymond Hartwell." Clara reached into her bag and produced a leather folder, which she slid across the table. Ethan opened it to find a contract, neatly typed, surprisingly thorough. His eyes scanned the terms. A marriage in name only, duration of 1 year, separate bedrooms, no conjugal expectations, complete financial separation except for the $5,000 payment to be made in 3 installments. "This is insane," he said flatly. "This is survival." Clara's Winter Creek eyes held steady. "I'm not asking you to love me, Mr. Cole. I'm asking you to scare people for 12 months while I salvage what's left of my father's legacy. In return, you get money you clearly need for something important, room and board at one of the finest ranches in Nevada, and the satisfaction of knowing you helped someone instead of just killing them." The barb hit home, as she'd likely intended. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "You don't know anything about me. I know you've killed 39 men in 4 years. I know you never spend more than a week in any town. I know you turn down jobs that would make you rich because you're hunting something specific, or someone. And I know that whatever you're hunting, you need money to find them." Clara leaned forward, all pretense of formality dropping away. "I'm desperate, Mr. Cole. Desperate enough to propose marriage to a killer. But you're desperate too, or you wouldn't be sitting here listening to this." Silence stretched between them, heavy with calculation and unspoken truths. Around them, the restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and the clink of silverware on china. Normal people living normal lives, free from the kind of choices that left blood on your hands and scars on your soul. Ethan thought about the man he'd been hunting for 3 years. Luther Kane, outlaw, murderer, the reason Ethan's brother lay in a grave outside Santa Fe and his sister-in-law had disappeared into the territories, likely dead or worse. Every trail had gone cold. Every lead had dried up. Every informant had demanded money Ethan didn't have. $5,000 would change that. 5,000 could buy the kind of information that only came when you greased enough palms and scared enough people. He thought about living a lie for a year, playing house with a woman he didn't know for reasons that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with mutual desperation. It should have felt wrong, dishonest. Instead, it just felt like another job, another contract, another step toward the only goal that mattered. "I have conditions," he said finally. Clara's shoulders dropped half an inch. Relief quickly masked, but unmistakable. "Name them." "First payment of $2,000 up front before the wedding. Second payment after 6 months. Final payment when the year's up and the contract dissolves." Ethan held up a hand when she started to protest. "Non-negotiable. I'm not trusting you to pay me when you've got what you need." "Agreed. I come and go as I please. If I get a lead on my business, I leave. You don't ask questions, don't demand explanations, don't expect me to choose your problems over mine." "Fine. And if anyone comes after you, Hartwell or anyone else, I handle it my way. You don't interfere, don't second guess, don't tell me how to do my job. You hired a killer to stand between you and trouble. You let the killer kill." Clara's face had gone pale, but she nodded. "Understood. Then we have a deal." Ethan stood, the chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made nearby diners jump. "Get the paperwork to the boarding house by tomorrow morning. We'll do this quick and quiet. Justice of the peace. No ceremony, no fuss. The sooner we're legally married, the sooner Hartwell backs off." "Mr. Cole." Clara rose as well, extending her hand like a man sealing a business arrangement. "Thank you." Ethan looked at her hand for a long moment before taking it. Her grip was firm, steady, the handshake of someone used to making deals and living with consequences. "Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Whitmore. You're buying a year of my protection, not my soul. Remember that." He left her standing by the table, walked out into the cooling evening air, and wondered what the hell he'd just agreed to. Behind him, through the restaurant window, he could see Clara sitting back down, her shoulders shaking slightly. Whether from relief or fear or second thoughts, he couldn't tell and didn't care. Tomorrow, he'd become a husband. A fake husband with a real wife and a contract that paid in blood money. It was the kind of bargain that would horrify normal people, the kind of arrangement that good folks would call sinful and wrong. But Ethan Cole had stopped being good people the day he'd stood over his brother's grave and sworn an oath of vengeance. This was just another step down a road he'd been traveling for years. A road that led through darkness toward a reckoning he could taste like copper on his tongue. 1 year, $5,000, and then he'd find Luther Kane and finish what should have ended 3 years ago. The wedding could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, he had a bottle waiting in his room and memories that needed drowning. The Justice of the Peace married them in his office at 9 o'clock the next morning, a ceremony so brief and impersonal it barely qualified as such. The man read the vows in a bored monotone, clearly used to marrying couples who needed legality more than romance. Ethan said, "I do," with the same inflection he'd used to order whiskey. Clara's voice shook slightly on her vows, but she got through them without crying. They signed the papers. The Justice of the Peace stamped them official. And just like that, Ethan Cole became a married man. Clara handed him an envelope thick with cash before they even left the office. $2,000 in clean bills, counted and recounted. "First installment," she said quietly. As agreed. Ethan pocketed the money without counting it. If she was shorting him, he'd find out soon enough, and she'd regret it. When do we leave for the ranch? This afternoon. I have a wagon packed and waiting. Clara glanced at him, and for the first time he saw uncertainty flicker across her face. The Hands know I've been in town looking for a husband. I sent word yesterday that I'd found one. They'll have questions. Let them question. They'll stop quick enough. They rode out of Silver Ridge 2 hours later, Clara driving the wagon with Ethan mounted beside her on the buckskin gelding he'd bought 6 months ago in Colorado. The road to the Whitmore ranch wound northwest through scrub grass and rocky hills, following a creek that ran fast and cold from snowmelt in the distant mountains. Clara drove in silence for the first hour, handling the wagon team with practiced ease. Ethan used the time to study the land, good grazing country, plenty of water, the kind of territory men would kill for if they were ambitious and ruthless enough. He could see why Hartwell wanted it. "Tell me about your foreman," he said finally. "The one who got beaten." Clara's hands tightened on the reins. "His name is Marcus Webb. He's been with the ranch since before I was born. Good man, knows cattle, knows the land. 3 men jumped him outside the bunkhouse after dark. Broke his ribs, his arm, maybe his jaw. Doctor says he'll heal, but not for weeks. The men who did it? Long gone by the time anyone found Marcus. He didn't recognize them. Said they wore masks. Didn't say much except that I should sell while I still could." "Hired muscle," Ethan said. "Probably drifters Hartwell paid for a quick job. You won't see them again. Next time he'll send someone more permanent." Clara shot him a sharp look. "You sound certain." "I know how men like Hartwell operate. He started with warnings and minor damage to test your resolve. When that didn't work, he escalated to violence against your people. Next comes direct threats against you. Probably a midnight visit, maybe a fire, something to make you feel unsafe in your own home. If you still don't break, he'll arrange an accident that looks natural enough to avoid legal trouble." "That's..." Clara swallowed hard. "That's terrifying." "That's reality." Ethan kept his voice flat, clinical, discussing strategy rather than horror. "Good thing you hired someone who knows how to stop it." They rode in silence for another mile before Clara spoke again, her voice carefully neutral. "The contract says separate bedrooms. There are 2 guest rooms in the main house. You can have your choice. I'll take whichever one gives me clear sight lines to the front approach and the bunkhouse. If trouble comes, I want to see it before it reaches you." "That would be the east room. It faces the yard and has windows on 2 walls." She paused. "The Hands eat breakfast at 6, dinner at 7. You're welcome to join them, but you don't have to. I usually eat alone in the house." "I'll eat with the Hands. Better to establish presence early." Clara nodded, and Ethan could practically see her mentally adjusting to the reality of having him in her life. This wasn't a normal marriage, and they both knew it. She'd bought a weapon, and weapons didn't sit at the family table making small talk. They stayed sharp, stayed ready, and did their job when called upon. The Whitmore ranch came into view as they crested a ridge, a sprawling operation that spoke of generations of hard work and careful expansion. The main house was 2 stories, whitewashed, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Barns, corrals, bunkhouses, a smithy, all arranged in careful order. Cattle dotted the near pastures, fat and healthy. Despite Clara's talk of debt and danger, the ranch itself looked prosperous, which meant Hartwell wanted it even more than Ethan had guessed. 4 men waited by the main house, ranch hands clearly, weathered and work-hardened, watching the approaching wagon with the wary interest of employees who'd heard rumors and weren't sure what to believe. Ethan studied them as Clara pulled the wagon to a stop. 3 were older, probably lifers who'd worked the ranch for decades. The 4th was younger, maybe 20, with the kind of pretty boy features that probably made him popular with the town girls. "Boys," Clara said, climbing down from the wagon with natural grace. "This is Ethan Cole, my husband. He'll be staying at the ranch." The reaction was immediate and varied. The oldest Hand, gray-haired, scar across his cheek, went very still, recognition flooding his eyes. The youngest looked confused, probably too new to the territories to have heard the stories. The other 2 exchanged glances that suggested they'd heard the name and weren't sure if they should be relieved or terrified. "Ethan, this is Samuel Carson." Clara gestured to the gray-haired man. He's our head hand now that Marcus is laid up. The others are David McKenna, Tom Bradshaw, and Johnny Pierce. Ethan dismounted, moving with the careful economy of motion that made men nervous because it suggested violence held in check. Gentlemen, Mr. Cole, Samuel's voice was gravelly, cautious. Heard about what happened in town yesterday? The Garrett brothers. Ancient history. Ethan's tone made it clear the subject was closed. What I care about is what happens here. Mrs. Cole says you've had trouble. Fences cut, stock scattered, your foreman beaten. That stops now. With respect, David said slowly. How's one man going to stop what's coming? Hartwell's got money and men and I've got a reputation. Ethan let the words hang in the air like gun smoke. By now, half of Silver Ridge knows Clara Whitmore married Ethan Cole. By tomorrow, the other half will know. By the end of the week, Hartwell will know. He'll also know that any man he sends against this ranch answers to me first. That changes the equation considerably. Samuel's scarred face split into something that might have been a smile. Reckon it does at that. Welcome to the Whitmore Ranch, Mr. Cole. Hope you like the accommodations because something tells me you just painted a target on your back the size of Texas. Wouldn't be the first time. Ethan grabbed his saddlebags and rifle from his horse. Show me that east room, Mrs. Cole. Then I want a tour of the property, every building, every approach, every place someone could hide or start trouble. By sundown, I want to know this ranch better than Hartwell's hired guns ever will. Clara nodded, something like relief crossing her face. For better or worse, they'd crossed the line from negotiation to execution. The contract was signed, the marriage was legal, and whatever came next would come with Ethan Cole standing between the threat and the woman who'd paid him to be there. As he followed her into the house, Ethan felt the familiar weight settling over him, the weight of responsibility, of vigilance, of knowing that men would come and he would have to stop them. It was a weight he'd carried for years, first as a lawman, then as a bounty hunter, now as a husband in name only. The room Clara showed him was simple but clean, a bed, a dresser, a washstand, windows on 2 walls just as she'd promised. He set his saddlebags on the bed and moved to the east window, studying the sight lines, calculating angles of approach, already planning where he'd position himself if, when, trouble arrived. Will this work? Clara asked from the doorway. Ethan turned to look at her, this woman who'd bought a year of his life with desperate money and colder calculation. In the afternoon light streaming through the windows, she looked young and tired and determined in equal measure. Whatever else she wasn't a coward. Fools didn't approach bounty hunters with marriage proposals. Cowards didn't stand their ground when men like Hartwell came calling. It'll work, he said. Get some rest, Mrs. Cole. Come evening, I'll need to meet with all the hands, set expectations, make sure everyone understands how this operation runs now. Tomorrow we ride the property lines, check for weak points, make sure your fences are solid and your cattle are accounted for. After that, he shrugged. After that, we wait for Hartwell to make his move. And when he does, I'll handle it the way I handle everything. Ethan's voice was cold as January wind. Quickly, permanently, without mercy. Clara nodded slowly, then withdrew, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like a cell door latching. Ethan turned back to the window, watching the ranch hands scatter to their work, watching the sun track west toward the mountains, watching for the first signs of the trouble he knew was coming. Somewhere out there, Raymond Hartwell was learning that Clara Whitmore had found herself a husband. Somewhere out there, men were being hired, plans were being made, violence was being prepared. And somewhere even further, in some distant town or hidden canyon, Luther Kane was living free while Ethan's brother rotted in the ground. 1 year. That's all this was. 1 year of playing house, of protecting a woman he didn't know for money he desperately needed. 1 year, and then he'd take his $5,000 and disappear back into the hunt that consumed him. He told himself it would be easy. He told himself he wouldn't get attached, wouldn't care, wouldn't let it become anything more than a business arrangement. He told himself a lot of things that first afternoon in the east room of the Whitmore Ranch, watching the sun paint the Nevada sky in shades of blood and gold. Most of them turned out to be lies. But that truth wouldn't reveal itself for months yet, through shared danger and quiet moments, and the slow erosion of the walls he'd built around what was left of his heart. For now he was just a killer who'd agreed to play husband for money and convenience. For now, that was enough. The sun set. Darkness came, and Ethan Cole began his year as a married man, armed and watchful, waiting for the violence he knew was coming. It wouldn't make him wait long. The first test came 3 days after the wedding, right on schedule. Ethan was checking the north fence line with Samuel when they spotted the riders. 5 men moving slow and deliberate across Whitmore land, not bothering to hide their presence or their intent. They sat their horses like men who expected to be obeyed, who'd grown accustomed to intimidation working better than negotiation. "That's trouble," Samuel said quietly, his hand drifting toward the rifle in his saddle scabbard. "That's opportunity." Ethan kept his voice level, watching the riders approach. "How many men does Hartwell usually send?" "Started with 2 for the fence cutting, 3 for Marcus." Samuel's jaw tightened. 5 means he's serious now, means he heard about you and decided to send a message anyway. "Good. Messages go both ways." They rode forward to meet the approaching men, and Ethan used the time to study them with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to read violence in the set of a man's shoulders and the way he wore his gun. The leader was a thick-shouldered man with a face like weathered granite, the kind who'd broken bones for money enough times that it no longer troubled his conscience. The others were harder to read, hired muscle, probably, men who fought for pay and didn't ask questions as long as the money was good. The 2 groups met near a stock pond, horses stamping and snorting in the afternoon heat. The granite-faced leader smiled, showing teeth that had seen better days. "Well now, you must be the famous Ethan Cole. Heard you went and married yourself the Whitmore widow. Congratulations on your new bride." "State your business or ride on." Ethan's hand rested casual on his thigh, 6 inches from his Colt. "You're on private property." "Just bringing a message from Mr. Hartwell. He wants Mrs. Cole, or I guess that's Mrs. Cole now, ain't it? He wants her to know his offer still stands. $30,000 for the ranch, paid in cash, no hard feelings. She's got 1 week to accept before circumstances change." "Circumstances already changed," Ethan said flatly. "She's married now. That means the ranch belongs to her husband, and her husband isn't interested in selling. You can take that message back to Hartwell, along with this one. Any man who sets foot on Whitmore land without an invitation answers to me. Personally." The leader's smile widened. "That a threat, Cole?" "That's a promise. Same promise I made to Bobby and Thomas Garrett before I put bullets in them. Same promise I've made to 39 other men who thought reputation was just talk." Ethan's voice stayed conversational, almost friendly, which somehow made the words more menacing. "Difference is, I'm giving you boys the chance to walk away. Garrett brothers didn't get that courtesy." One of the other riders, younger, with the kind of swagger that came from winning too many bar fights against drunk cowboys, laughed. 5 against 2, old man. You like those odds?" "I like them fine." Ethan's eyes never left the leader's face. "Question is, do you like them enough to test whether I can draw and fire faster than you can blink? Because I'm curious which one of you 5 wants to be first." The swagger died. The young rider's hand, which had been drifting toward his gun, froze and then slowly moved back to his saddle horn. The leader's smile faded into something harder, colder, calculating new odds that didn't favor him as much as he'd hoped. "Hartwell ain't gonna like this," he said finally. "Hartwell can express his displeasure in person if he wants. Otherwise, he can send better men next time." Ethan paused, letting the insult land. "Now get off this land before I decide 5 fewer hired guns might send a clearer message than words." For a moment, the tension stretched tight enough to snap. Then the leader pulled his horse around, gesturing to his men to follow. They rode away at a canter that wasn't quite a retreat, but close enough to satisfy. Ethan watched them until they disappeared over the ridge, counting heartbeats, waiting for the ambush that didn't come. Samuel let out a long breath. That was either the bravest thing I ever saw or the stupidest. Little of both, probably. Ethan turned his horse back toward the ranch. But now Hartwell knows his regular tactics won't work. He'll either back off or escalate. Either way, we'll know where we stand. And if he escalates, then men die. Ethan said it with the same tone he might use to predict rain. Question is whether they're his men or ours. I intend to make sure it's his. They rode back to the ranch in silence, each man lost in thoughts about what would come next. Ethan had seen this pattern before. The testing, the posturing, the inevitable violence when intimidation failed. Some men backed down when they realized the cost had gotten too high. Others doubled down, pride and stubbornness overriding common sense. He had a feeling Raymond Hartwell was the doubling down type. Clara was waiting on the porch when they returned, her face tight with worry that she tried to hide behind a neutral expression. I saw riders from the upstairs window. Who were they? Hartwell's men, 5 of them. Ethan dismounted, handed the reins to Samuel with a nod of thanks. They delivered a message. I sent one back. Probably won't hear from them again for a few days while Hartwell decides how to respond. What did you tell them? That we're not selling, that this is my land now, legally speaking, and anyone who comes uninvited answers to me. He climbed the porch steps, noting the way Clara's hands gripped the railing, knuckles white. He'll test that claim. Soon. When he does, it gets messy. Clara's jaw set in that stubborn line he was starting to recognize. I knew what I was buying when I hired you, Mr. Cole. I'm not having second thoughts. Didn't say you were, but there's a difference between knowing violence is coming and watching it happen. When Hartwell's men come back, and they will come back, I need you to trust me to handle it. That means staying in the house, staying away from windows, and not interfering no matter what you hear or see. I'm not a child who needs protecting. No, you're the reason those men are coming. Ethan's voice turned hard. Which means you're the target they'll use to get to me. You want to help? Stay safe. Stay out of the way. Let me do what you paid me to do. He didn't wait for her response, just brushed past her into the house and up the stairs to his room. It was harsh, colder than it needed to be, but Clara needed to understand the reality they were living in now. This wasn't a game or a negotiation. This was the prelude to killing, and killing required focus that couldn't be divided by worry about civilians in the crossfire. That night at dinner, the hands were subdued, talking in low voices about the afternoon's encounter. Word had spread quickly, as it always did on a ranch where men lived in close quarters, and gossip was better than whiskey for passing time. Ethan ate in silence, listening to their speculation, measuring their courage. Johnny Pierce, the young pretty boy, was full of bravado about what he'd do if Hartwell's men came back. David and Tom were more cautious, old enough to know that talk was cheaper than action. Samuel just watched Ethan with those calculating eyes, probably wondering if he'd made a deal with salvation or invited the devil to dinner. Mr. Cole, Johnny's voice carried across the bunkhouse dining room. That true what they say about you and the Garrett brothers? That you killed 2 of them in under 3 seconds? 2 seconds, Ethan said without looking up from his plate. Third one lived because he was smart enough to surrender. How many men you killed total? Heard it was over 40. 39 before the Garretts, 41 after. But who's counting? Ethan finally looked up, meeting Johnny's eager gaze with flat eyes. You thinking about making it 42, boy? The bunkhouse went dead silent. Johnny's face flushed red. No, sir, I know what you meant. You're young and stupid and think killing makes a man impressive. Ethan pushed his plate away, appetite gone. Let me tell you something about those 41 men. Every single one of them thought they were fast enough, smart enough, mean enough to beat me. Every single one died surprised. You want to be impressed by something? Be impressed that I'm still alive when better men than me are in the ground. He stood, chair scraping loud in the silence, and walked out into the night. Behind him, he could hear Samuel's voice, low and angry, probably dressing down Johnny for being a fool. Good. The boy needed to understand that this wasn't entertainment. This was survival. And survival meant respecting the violence that kept you breathing. The night air was cool, stars bright overhead in the way they only got this far from cities and their smoke. Ethan walked to the corral fence and leaned against it, watching the horses move like shadows in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Hartwell was planning his next move. Somewhere even further, Luther Kane was living free while Ethan's brother stayed dead. That was harsh. Ethan didn't turn at Claire's voice. Boy needed to hear it. Maybe, but you didn't need to scare him half to death. She joined him out of the fence, keeping a careful distance between them. The men respect you, fear you even. You don't need to work so hard to prove you're dangerous. Respect and fear keep people alive. Fondness gets them killed. Ethan finally glanced at her, noting the shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. That boy thinks killing is glorious because he's never seen what a bullet does to a man's insides, never watched someone bleed out begging for their mother, never had to tell a widow that her husband died for money or pride or because he was too slow on the draw. And you have, too many times to count. Ethan turned back to the horses. That's what you bought, Mrs. Cole. A man with blood on his hands and no illusions about what he is. You want someone gentler, someone who'll make small talk and pretend this is a real marriage. You hired the wrong killer. Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, thoughtful. My father used to say that the most dangerous men were the ones who knew exactly what they were and didn't pretend otherwise. He'd have liked you, I think, or been terrified of you, possibly both. Smart man, your father. Shame about the debt. He meant well. He always meant well. Claire's voice carried old pain, old frustration. He just thought wanting something badly enough would make it work out. Thought love and hard work could overcome bad timing and worse luck. By the time he realized he was wrong, it was too late to fix it. So you're fixing it for him. I'm fixing it for me. The correction was gentle but firm. He left me this mess. I'm choosing how to clean it up. That includes hiring you, marrying you, and whatever comes after. She paused. Though I'll admit, watching you face down 5 armed men this afternoon was more terrifying than I expected. You didn't show it? My mother taught me that showing fear was the same as showing weakness. On a ranch full of men who questioned whether a woman could run anything, weakness wasn't an option. Clara pulled her shawl tighter. Besides, I hired you specifically because you're terrifying. Seems counterproductive to complain about it now. Despite himself, Ethan felt his mouth twitch toward something that might have been a smile if he'd let it form completely. Fair enough. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the horses, listening to the night sounds of the ranch settling down. It should have felt awkward, married strangers making conversation by a corral fence, trying to find common ground in a relationship built on contracts and desperation. Instead, it just felt quiet. Peaceful, even. I should go in, Clara said finally. Early start tomorrow. Samuel wants to move the cattle from the east pasture before the weather turns. I'll ride with them. Good chance to check the southern fence line. Make sure we don't have any more unwelcome visitors. Clara nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Mr. Cole? Thank you for this afternoon, for all of it, really. I know this isn't what you signed up for, playing ranch husband, dealing with my problems, but I'm grateful you're here. You're paying me $5,000. Gratitude's included in the price. Still, thank you. She walked away before he could respond, her figure disappearing into the dark bulk of the main house. Ethan stayed by the fence for another hour, thinking about the conversation, about the woman who'd bought his protection and gotten more honest than she probably intended. Clara Whitmore was proving more complicated than he'd expected, tougher, sharper, more willing to adapt than most people facing her situation. She wasn't looking for a hero to save her. She was looking for a weapon to buy her time. He could respect that. Hell, he could almost like it, which was dangerous because liking led to caring, and caring led to the kind of divided attention that got people killed. This was a job, nothing more. 1 year, $5,000, and then he disappeared back into the hunt for Luther Kane. He needed to remember that. The next 2 weeks fell into an uneasy rhythm. Ethan rode the property lines daily, sometimes alone, sometimes with Samuel or one of the other hands. They found no more cut fences, no scattered cattle, no signs of sabotage. The silence felt wrong, like the pause before a storm, but there was nothing to do except wait and stay vigilant. Clara ran the ranch with quiet competence, handling correspondence, managing accounts, making decisions about breeding stock and grazing rotation with the confidence of someone who'd been doing it for years rather than weeks. She and Ethan fell into a careful dance of proximity without intimacy, shared meals where they discussed ranch business, brief conversations about security and supplies, a polite distance that acknowledged their legal bond while respecting its artificial nature. At night, Ethan lay in his room listening to the ranch settle, his hand never far from the gun on his nightstand, waiting for trouble that didn't come. Until it did. The fire started just after midnight on a moonless Thursday. Ethan woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of horses screaming in panic. He was out of bed and at the window in seconds, already reaching for his gun belt as he took in the scene below. The barn, the big one that held hay and tack and the breeding stock, was burning. Flames climbed the wooden walls, fed by dry timber and whatever accelerant someone had used to ensure it caught fast. In the firelight, he could see figures moving, men on horseback, circling the ranch yard, one of them leveling a rifle at the bunkhouse. Ethan didn't think, just moved. He grabbed his rifle, threw open his door, and was halfway down the stairs when he heard Clara's door open behind him. "Stay in your room," he barked without looking back. "Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." He hit the front door at a run, going low as he cleared the porch, knowing that silhouette made him a target. A bullet smacked into the porch post where his head had been a second earlier. He rolled, came up behind a water trough, and brought the rifle to his shoulder in one smooth motion. The rider who'd shot at him was silhouetted against the flames, making him an easy target. Ethan squeezed the trigger, and the man went down hard, tumbling from his saddle like a dropped sack of grain. His horse bolted, disappearing into the darkness beyond the firelight. "Bunkhouse, get out here!" House. Ethan's voice carried over the roar of the flames and the panic of horses. "We've got raiders!" The bunkhouse door crashed open, and the hands poured out. Samuel first with his rifle already up, followed by the others in various states of dress and readiness. David took a bullet in the shoulder before he'd cleared the doorway, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. Tom dragged him back inside while Johnny and Samuel took cover and started returning fire. Ethan counted riders, 4, no 5, moving fast and chaotic, firing wildly at anything that moved. Not professionals then, just hired guns with more courage than sense, probably promised easy money for burning a barn and scaring a widow. They hadn't counted on the widow having a killer for a husband. Ethan dropped the second rider with a shot that caught him center mass. The man screamed, cutting off abruptly as he hit the ground and didn't move. The others wheeled their horses, suddenly realizing they were in a real fight rather than the easy intimidation they'd expected. "Whitmore!" one of them shouted, voice cracking with fear or excitement, or both. "This is just the start. Hartwell says you got 1 week to sell, or next time it's the house." Ethan answered with his rifle, the bullet passing close enough to the shouting man's head that he could probably feel the wind of its passage. The rider didn't wait to deliver more threats, just spurred his horse and ran. His companions followed, racing away into the darkness with the speed of men who'd suddenly remembered they were mortal. Samuel fired a few more shots after them, more to speed their departure than with any hope of hitting them. Then silence fell, broken only by the roar of the burning barn and the continued panic of the horses still trapped inside. "The horses!" Clara's voice cut through the chaos. Ethan turned to see her running from the house, nightdress streaming behind her, heading straight for the burning barn. "Clara, no!" He was moving before he finished the words, rifle forgotten, focused only on intercepting her before she did something heroically stupid. She was fast, fear and determination giving her speed, but Ethan was faster. He caught her 10 feet from the barn door, arms wrapping around her waist, dragging her backward even as she fought him. "Let me go! The horses! They'll burn! Let me go!" "Samuel, get those doors open!" Ethan tightened his grip as Clara kicked and struggled. "Clara, stop! You can't help them by dying." "They're burning!" Her voice broke on a sob. "I can hear them! Oh God, I can hear them!" Samuel and Tom hit the barn doors together, throwing them wide despite the heat and smoke that poured out. Horses burst through the opening like demons fleeing hell, eyes rolling white, nostrils flared, coats slick with sweat and terror. They scattered into the night, and Ethan counted them by firelight. 8, 9, 10. All accounted for, all alive. Clara went limp in his arms, her fight draining away as relief replaced panic. "They're out! They're all out!" "Yeah." Ethan loosened his grip but didn't let go, very aware of how she was trembling. "They're safe. You can stop trying to run into burning buildings now." "The barn! We have to save the barn." "The barn's gone." Samuel appeared beside them, face grim and smoke-stained. "Fire's too hot, spread too fast. Best we can do is wet down the other buildings. Make sure it doesn't jump." He was right. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames climbing 40 feet into the night sky. Heat so intense they had to back away. The hands formed a bucket line from the well, throwing water on the bunkhouse and the smaller outbuildings, fighting to contain rather than extinguish. Ethan finally released Clara, and she sagged against him for just a moment before catching herself and stepping away. In the firelight, her face was streaked with tears and soot, her nightdress torn from her run across the yard. She looked young and scared and furious all at once. "Two dead," Samuel reported, gesturing to the bodies in the yard. "David took a bullet in the shoulder, but he'll live. Johnny got kicked by one of the horses, bruised ribs, nothing serious. Could have been a hell of a lot worse. Could have been nothing if Hartwell wasn't a coward who hires men to burn barns in the middle of the night." Clara's voice shook with rage. "How much? How much does it cost to buy the kind of men who do this?" $100 each, probably. Ethan was scanning the darkness beyond the firelight, looking for any sign the riders had regrouped. Plus another 100 for the man who organized it. Cheap, as intimidation goes. He probably expected it to work. Well, it didn't. Clara turned to face the burning barn, her spine straightening, shoulders pulling back. "Samuel, how long to rebuild?" 6 weeks with good lumber and enough hands. 8 if we have to source materials from Reno. Samuel wiped soot from his face. "But Miss Clara, Mrs. Cole, that's time and money we don't—" "We'll find it." She cut him off with a gesture. "Get the fire contained, check on David, make sure the horses are rounded up before they hurt themselves. Tomorrow we inventory the damage and start planning the rebuild." "Clara," Ethan kept his voice low, meant for her ears only. "This was a warning. Next time it'll be worse." "Let it be worse." She met his gaze with Winter Creek eyes gone hard as flint. "I'm not selling. Not to Hartwell, not to anyone. This is my land, bought with my father's sweat and my family's history. If Hartwell wants it, he can try to take it. But he'll have to go through both of us first." Something shifted in Ethan's chest, a feeling he couldn't name and didn't want to examine too closely. This woman, this sharp-minded, stubborn, reckless woman, was either the bravest person he'd ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both. Probably both. "All right," he said quietly. "Then we make him pay for trying." Clara nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the house with her head high and her spine straight, every inch the ranch owner despite her torn nightdress and bare feet. The hands watched her go with something like awe on their faces, and Ethan understood why. They'd just seen their employer face down fire and gunmen without flinching. Respect like that couldn't be bought or demanded. It had to be earned in moments exactly like this. The fire burned for another 2 hours before finally consuming itself, leaving nothing but smoking timbers and the acrid smell of destruction. Dawn found them exhausted and soot-stained, taking stock of what they'd lost and what they'd saved. The barn was gone, along with most of the winter hay and all the tack they'd stored inside. 2 of Hartwell's men lay dead in the yard, covered with canvas while they waited for the sheriff to come collect them. David was bandaged and hurting, but alive. The horses were accounted for, spooked but unharmed. It could have been worse, it should have been worse, and that worried Ethan more than the attack itself because it suggested Hartwell had miscalculated badly. Men who miscalculated tended to overreact in response, and overreaction led to escalation. This was just the beginning. Clara emerged from the house as the sun cleared the horizon, dressed properly now in riding clothes and boots, her hair pulled back severe and practical. She'd washed the soot from her face, but the exhaustion showed in the shadows under her eyes and the tightness around her mouth. "Samuel's riding to town to fetch the sheriff," she said, joining Ethan by the smoking ruins. "Not that Carson will do anything useful, but we need this documented. Legal record, for whatever that's worth." "It's worth nothing if Hartwell owns the law along with the bank." Ethan had seen this pattern before in a dozen towns. But it might slow him down, make him think twice before trying again. Or make him angrier. Claire's voice was quiet, thoughtful. "I knew this would be hard. I knew people would fight back, but actually watching men shoot at my home, burn my barn, hurt my people." She trailed off, then shook her head. "I hate this. I hate that my father's dream became a battleground. I hate that good men are bleeding because I won't surrender to a bully." "Then sell." Ethan said it flat, testing her resolve. "Take Hartwell's 30,000, walk away clean, start fresh somewhere else. Pride's not worth dying for." Clara turned to look at him, and her eyes held something that might have been disappointment. Is that what you do? If someone came after something you loved, would you just hand it over to avoid a fight? Ethan thought about his brother, about the rage that had driven him for 3 years, about the oath he'd sworn over a grave in Santa Fe. No, he admitted. I'd burn the world before I gave them the satisfaction. Then don't ask me to do what you wouldn't. Clara turned back to the ruins. This ranch is all I have left of my father. It's my history, my legacy, maybe my future if I can salvage it. Hartwell wants to take that from me because he's greedy and powerful and thinks women should bow to men with money. Well, I won't. Even if it costs me everything, I won't. They stood in silence, watching smoke rise from the destroyed barn, and Ethan felt the last of his emotional distance begin to crack. This wasn't just a job anymore. This woman wasn't just a client paying for his protection. She was a stubborn, fierce, reckless force of nature who'd rather fight than flee, and something about that called to the part of him that had chosen hunting over hiding when his world fell apart. All right, he said finally. Then we fight, but we fight smart. No more heroic runs into burning buildings. No more standing in the open when bullets are flying. You hired me to protect you, which means you listen when I tell you to stay down, stay back, stay safe. Understood? Understood. Clara held out her hand the way she had in the restaurant, a business arrangement being struck between equals. Partners? Ethan looked at her hand, at her determined face, at the ruins of the barn, and the promise of more violence to come. He should have walked away, should have told her the price had gotten too high, the complications too dangerous, should have taken his $2,000 and disappeared before whatever was growing between them became something he couldn't control. Instead, he took her hand. Partners. Her grip was firm and steady, and when she smiled, really smiled, not the polite version she used for ranch business, but something genuine and warm, Ethan felt something shift inside him that he hadn't felt in 3 long years. It felt almost like hope, which was the most dangerous thing of all. That handshake marked a turning point neither of them fully understood yet, a shift from transaction to something more complicated, more dangerous. Over the weeks that followed, as they rebuilt the barn and fortified the ranch against further attacks, the careful distance they'd maintained began to erode in ways both subtle and profound. It started small. Clara began joining Ethan for morning coffee on the porch before the hands woke, the two of them watching the sun paint the Nevada hills in shades of gold and copper. They didn't talk much during those quiet hours, but the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward, the companionship of two people who'd discovered they could exist in the same space without performing or pretending. Then came the shared work. Ethan had expected to handle security while Clara managed the ranch, their responsibilities cleanly divided. Instead, he found himself drawn into the daily operation, helping move cattle, mending fence, even learning the basics of the ledger books that Clara pored over each evening. She, in turn, insisted on understanding his security measures, learning to shoot properly rather than just waving a rifle around, memorizing the signals he'd arranged with the hands in case of another attack. "You're a decent student," Ethan admitted one afternoon as Clara successfully hit the tin can target he'd set up 50 yards from the house. "Better than most men I've tried to teach." "That's because most men think they already know everything." Clara lowered the rifle, a satisfied smile playing at her lips. "I know I'm starting from nothing, so I actually listen to instruction. Revolutionary concept." "Revolutionary and rare?" Ethan took the rifle from her, checking the mechanism with practiced efficiency. "Do that 100 more times and you might actually be dangerous." "I'm already dangerous. I married you, didn't I?" The comment was light, teasing, but it hit something in Ethan's chest that he'd been trying to ignore for weeks now. The way Clara moved through the ranch with quiet confidence, the way she stood her ground when lesser people would have folded, the way her laugh sounded when Samuel told terrible jokes over dinner, all of it was worming its way past the walls he'd built around anything resembling feeling. "Ethan?" Clara's voice pulled him back. "You all right? You looked 1,000 miles away just then." "Just thinking." He handed the rifle back. "Again, same target. And remember what I said about breathing." She nodded and raised the rifle, her form better now than it had been 2 weeks ago, the hesitation gone from her movements. She squeezed the trigger, and the can jumped and spun. When she turned back to him, her face was flushed with pleasure and pride, and Ethan had to look away before she could see whatever expression he was failing to hide. This was getting complicated in exactly the way he'd told himself it wouldn't. The second payment came due at the end of October, 6 months into their arrangement. Clara counted out $1,500 in her study, the numbers in her ledger showing exactly how much the barn fire and lost hay had cost her. She handed Ethan the envelope without comment, but he could see the strain in the tightness around her eyes. "This puts you close to broke," he said, not making it a question. "Close, but not there yet. We've got enough to make it through winter if we're careful. Spring cattle sales should put us back in the black, assuming Hartwell doesn't burn anything else." Clara closed the ledger with a soft thump. "Don't worry about the final payment. I'll have it when the year's up." "I'm not worried about the money." The words came out before Ethan could stop them, and they both froze, the admission hanging in the air between them like gun smoke. Claire's eyes searched his face. "Then what are you worried about?" "Everything," Ethan wanted to say. "I'm worried that this stopped being pretend somewhere between the barn fire and this morning's coffee. I'm worried that I care what happens to you more than I care about finding Luther Kane. I'm worried that when this year ends, walking away is going to hurt worse than any bullet I've taken." Instead, he said, "Hartwell's been quiet for too long. 2 months since the fire, and nothing, no threats, no sabotage, no hired guns. That's not surrender, that's planning. Maybe he finally got the message that we're not backing down. Or maybe he's waiting for us to get comfortable before he hits us again, harder this time." Ethan moved to the window, studying the ranch yard with the constant vigilance that had kept him alive this long. "We should send someone to town. Quietly. Find out what Hartwell's been up to, who he's been talking to, whether he's hired any new muscle. I'll send Tom tomorrow with the supply run. He's got family in Silver Ridge, knows how to listen without drawing attention." Clara joined him at the window, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, feel the warmth of her presence. "You really think he's planning something big?" "I think men like Hartwell don't give up when they want something. They adapt. We showed him that direct attacks don't work, so he'll try something else. Something we're not expecting." Ethan's jaw tightened. "The question is what?" They got their answer 3 days later when Tom returned from town, white-faced and shaking, the supply wagon forgotten as he burst into the ranch house where Clara and Ethan were reviewing the winter feed calculations. "It's Marcus," Tom gasped, hands trembling as he clutched his hat. "Hartwell's men got him, took him right off the street in broad daylight. They're saying, Jesus, they're saying he stole money from the bank, saying they've got witnesses and everything." Clara went pale. "That's insane. Marcus would never—" "Of course he wouldn't." Ethan was already moving, strapping on his gun belt, checking the chambers of his Colt with mechanical precision. "It's a frame. Hartwell knows he can't take us directly, so he's going after our people instead. Where's Marcus now?" "Jail. Sheriff Carson arrested him this afternoon. Trial set for Monday." Tom's voice cracked. "They're talking about hanging if he's convicted. Ethan, they're going to kill him for something he didn't do." "Like hell they are." Ethan grabbed his hat and coat. "Clara, I need you to write down everything Marcus was doing the day they claim he robbed the bank. Where he was, who he was with, anything that can prove he couldn't have done it. You're going to town?" Clara was already moving toward her desk, pulling out paper. "I'm coming with you." "No." "Yes." She cut him off with a look that brooked no argument. "Marcus has been with this ranch since before I was born. If Hartwell thinks he can destroy a good man's life to get to me, he's going to see exactly what that costs him. Besides, I'm the ranch owner. People will talk to me who won't talk to you." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the ranch house where she'd be safe while he handled this the only way he knew how, with violence and intimidation and whatever else it took to get Marcus free. But looking at Claire's face, seeing the steel in her eyes and the set of her jaw, he knew arguing would be pointless. "Fine, but we do this my way. We go in smart, we don't make threats we can't back up, and if shooting starts, you get behind me and stay there. Understood?" "Understood." Clara was already pulling on her riding jacket. "Samuel, you're in charge while we're gone. Double the night watch, keep the rifles loaded, and if anyone so much as looks at this ranch wrong, you shoot first and apologize never." Samuel nodded grimly. "Yes, ma'am. You two be careful. Hartwell's playing for keeps now." "So are we," Clara Clara said softly. So are we. They rode hard for Silver Ridge, making the trip in half the usual time. The sun was setting as they reached town, painting the wooden storefronts in shades of blood orange that felt like an omen. Ethan could feel the weight of watching eyes as they rode down Main Street, could sense the whispers starting even before they dismounted at the sheriff's office. Sheriff Carson looked up from his desk when they entered, his fat face going carefully neutral in the way of men who knew they were on shaky moral ground, but had committed to their course anyway. Mrs. Cole. Mr. Cole. He didn't stand, didn't offer any pleasantries. I suppose you've heard about Marcus Webb. We've heard lies. Claire's voice was cold as January frost. Marcus Webb is the most honest man in Nevada. If you believe he robbed your bank, you're either stupid or corrupt. Which is it, Sheriff? Carson's face flushed. Now you see here? No, you see here. Ethan stepped forward, and something in his movement made the sheriff's hand drift toward his gun. You're going to tell us exactly what evidence you've got, who your witnesses are, and why you arrested a man on Monday for a robbery that supposedly happened 3 weeks ago. Then we're going to tear that evidence apart piece by piece until even you can't pretend this is legitimate. The evidence is solid. We've got 2 witnesses who saw Webb coming out of the bank vault after hours. We've got $50 in marked bills found in his room at the boarding house. And we've got his own admission that he was in town that day. Carson leaned back in his chair with false confidence. That's enough for a conviction in any court. Marked bills that were conveniently found after you arrested him, Clara said. Witnesses who I'm guessing work for Raymond Hartwell or owe him money. And of course Marcus was in town that day. He was buying medicine for his injured ribs from when Hartwell's men beat him half to death. The same beating you did nothing about, I might add. That's all supposition. That's the truth, and you know it. Ethan's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, more menacing than any shout. Here's what's going to happen, Sheriff. You're going to let us see Marcus. You're going to give us time to mount a proper defense. And you're going to remember that manufacturing evidence against an innocent man makes you complicit in whatever Hartwell's planning. I don't take orders from bounty hunters. No, but you take money from bankers. Ethan leaned over the desk, close enough to see the sweat beading on Carson's forehead. And when this falls apart, and it will fall apart, everyone in Silver Ridge is going to know you arrested a good man on false charges because Raymond Hartwell paid you to. That the kind of legacy you want, Sheriff? The kind that gets remembered in whispers and shame? Carson's throat worked as he swallowed hard. 5 minutes with Webb, that's all you get. We'll take 10, Clara said, and we'll take the names of those witnesses while you're at it. The sheriff led them to the cells in the back, where Marcus sat on a narrow cot looking older than his 50 years, his face still showing the bruises from the beating months ago. When he saw Clara, his eyes went bright with relief and shame mixed together. Miss Clara, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about all this. You have nothing to apologize for, Marcus. Clara gripped the cell bars, her knuckles white. We know this is Hartwell's doing. We're going to prove it and get you out of here. They've got witnesses. They've got money they say I stole. Marcus's voice cracked. How do you prove you didn't do something when they've got all that? By proving you were somewhere else, Ethan said. Walk us through that day. Every detail you can remember. Where you went, who you saw, what time you did what. Marcus closed his eyes, thinking. I left the ranch around 9 in the morning. My ribs were still hurting bad from the beating, and Doc Henderson had told me to come back if the pain got worse. I rode straight to his office, got there maybe 10:30. He examined me, gave me laudanum for the pain, told me to rest. I was there until noon, I remember, because the church bells were ringing when I left. Good. That's good. Claire was taking notes on paper she'd borrowed from the sheriff's desk. What then? I stopped at the general store, picked up some tobacco and a new shirt. Sally Morrison was working the counter. She'll remember. We talked about the weather for a good 10 minutes. Then I had lunch at the boarding house. There were maybe 8 other people in the dining room, all locals. After that, Marcus frowned, concentrating. After that, I went to the livery to check on my horse. The blacksmith, young fellow named Peters, he was reshoeing a mare, and we talked about hoof rot for maybe 20 minutes. What time was this? Ethan asked. Had to be around 2, maybe 2:30. I left town right after, got back to the ranch before supper. Marcus looked between them. Why? What does this prove? It proves you couldn't have robbed the bank, Clara said, a fierce smile spreading across her face. The robbery supposedly happened at 1:30 in the afternoon, but you were at the general store at noon and at the livery at 2. That's 3 witnesses who can place you nowhere near the bank at the time of the robbery. 4 witnesses, Ethan corrected. Doc Henderson, Sally Morrison, the boarding house cook, and the blacksmith. All of them reputable? All of them with no reason to lie for you. Carson's case just fell apart. But Marcus looked troubled rather than relieved. What if they don't believe them? What if Hartwell's paid them off too? He can't have paid off everyone in Silver Ridge, Clara said firmly. And if he has, then we'll make enough noise that people outside this town start paying attention. We'll get a lawyer from Reno. We'll demand a proper investigation. A sound from the front office cut her off. Raised voices, the scrape of boots on wood, the unmistakable click of a gun hammer being cocked. Ethan's hand went to his Colt even as he pushed Clara behind him, his body between her and whatever threat was coming. The door to the cell area crashed open, and Raymond Hartwell strode through, flanked by 2 hard-looking men Ethan didn't recognize. The banker was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of soft hands and calculating eyes that suggested he'd never done a day of honest work in his life. "Well, well," Hartwell's voice was smooth, cultured, completely at odds with the threat radiating from his hired guns. "The happy couple come to visit their thieving ranch hand. How touching." Hartwell. Ethan didn't move, didn't shift his hand from his gun. "Didn't know you made social calls to the jail." "I don't. But when I heard that Mrs. Cole was making wild accusations about planted evidence and false witnesses, I felt compelled to set the record straight." Hartwell's smile never reached his eyes. "Marcus Webb is a thief who robbed my bank. The evidence is clear, the witnesses are reliable, and justice will be served on Monday when he hangs. The only thing that'll hang on Monday is your reputation when we prove this whole case is a fraud." Clara stepped around Ethan despite his attempt to keep her back. "We've got 4 witnesses who'll testify Marcus was nowhere near your bank when the robbery happened. Your frame job just collapsed." "Did it?" Hartwell pulled a folded paper from his jacket, holding it up like a trophy. "This is a sworn statement from Dr. Henderson saying that Marcus Webb left his office at 10:30 in the morning, not noon. This other statement is from Sally Morrison saying she doesn't remember serving Marcus at all that day. Funny how memory works, isn't it? Especially when people are reminded of debts they owe, mortgages that could be called in, professional licenses that could be revoked." Clara's face went white. "You threatened them. You threatened witnesses to protect your lie." "I didn't threaten anyone. I simply reminded them of their obligations and helped them remember events more accurately." Hartwell tucked the papers back into his jacket. "By Monday, you won't find a single person in Silver Ridge willing to testify for Marcus Webb. And without witnesses, without alibi, all you've got is a guilty man and a grieving widow who should have sold her ranch when she had the chance." Ethan felt rage building in his chest, cold and dangerous, the kind that usually ended with bodies on the ground. His hand tightened on his gun, and Hartwell's men immediately tensed, their own hands moving toward weapons. The space in the jail cell corridor suddenly felt charged with the promise of violence, everyone waiting for someone to make the first move. "Ethan, don't." Clara's hand on his arm was gentle but firm. "Not here. Not like this. Listen to your wife, Cole." Hartwell's smile widened. "Though I must say, I'm disappointed. I'd heard you were the most dangerous man in 3 territories, but here you are, playing house on a failing ranch, protecting a woman who'd be better off accepting reality. How the mighty have fallen." "You want to see how far I've fallen?" Ethan's voice was dead calm, the quiet before a storm. "Keep talking. Keep pushing. Sooner or later you're going to make a mistake, and when you do, I'll be there. And unlike Marcus, I won't need witnesses or trials or justice to handle you." "Is that a threat?" "That's a promise." Ethan took a step forward, and Hartwell's guards immediately drew their guns. "Same promise I made to 41 other men who thought they were smarter or tougher or more protected than they really were. You know what they all have in common, Hartwell? They're all dead, and I'm still here." For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Hartwell's face. He tried to hide it behind bluster, but Ethan could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way he took an involuntary step backward. "Sheriff Carson," Hartwell's voice came out higher than he probably intended. "Are you going to allow this man to threaten me in your own jail?" Carson appeared in the doorway, looking miserable and trapped. "Mr. Cole, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "We're going." Clara's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "But we'll be back Monday for the trial, and we'll have a lawyer from Reno with us, and a statement for the newspapers about how Raymond Hartwell manufactures evidence against innocent men. By the time we're done, everyone in Nevada will know exactly what kind of man you are." "You do that, Mrs. Cole." Hartwell had recovered his composure, though his guards still looked nervous. "And I'll make sure everyone knows how Clara Whitmore destroyed her father's legacy through pride and poor judgment. We'll see which story people believe." Ethan and Clara left the jail in tense silence, very aware of the eyes watching from storefronts and boardwalks, the whispers that followed them down the street. They didn't speak until they were mounted and riding out of town, the lights of Silver Ridge fading behind them. "He's going to kill Marcus," Clara said finally, her voice hollow. "Even if we bring a lawyer, even if we get the trial moved, Hartwell owns this town. He'll find a way." "Not if we find a way first." Ethan's mind was already working through possibilities, angles, the kind of desperate plays that got people killed, but sometimes, rarely, worked. "We've got 4 days until Monday. That's enough time." "Enough time for what?" "To make Hartwell confess." Ethan looked at her, and Clara must have seen something in his expression because she went very still. "You hired me to protect you, to scare off threats, to do whatever it took to save your ranch. Well, saving your ranch means saving Marcus, because without him you can't run the operation. So I'm going to do what you paid me to do." "Ethan, if you're talking about forcing a confession through," Clara struggled with the words. "That's not justice. That's survival." Ethan's voice was flat, hard, completely without mercy. "Hartwell framed an innocent man and threatened witnesses to cover it up. He's planning to hang Marcus as a message to you, to show you what happens when you don't surrender. So we're going to send him a message back, and we're going to make sure he never forgets it." They rode in silence after that, the weight of what was coming settling over them like fog. Clara's face in the moonlight looked troubled, conflicted, caught between the civilized rules she'd been raised to follow and the brutal reality of what it took to survive when civilization failed you. "I don't want you to become a murderer for me," she said finally, so quietly Ethan almost didn't hear it. "I've been a killer for years, Clara. The only difference is whether I kill for money or for something that actually matters." He glanced at her, saw the way her hands gripped the reins, knuckles white in the darkness. "But if you're asking me to stand by and watch Hartwell hang Marcus, to play by rules that only apply to people without power, then you're asking the wrong man, because I don't know how to do that anymore." Clara was silent for a long moment, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the whisper of wind through sagebrush. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, decided, the voice of a woman who'd made a choice and would live with its consequences. "Then do what you have to do. But Ethan, don't do it alone. We're partners, remember? Whatever comes next, we face it together." Something in Ethan's chest cracked open at those words, something he'd kept carefully locked away since the day he'd buried his brother and sworn his oath of vengeance. This woman, this fierce, stubborn, impossible woman, was offering him something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Not just partnership in a legal sense, but the kind of trust and loyalty that meant she'd stand beside him, even when what he was planning crossed lines most people wouldn't even approach. "Together," he agreed quietly. "But Clara, when this is over, when we've saved Marcus and dealt with Hartwell, there's something I need to tell you, something about why I really took this job, what I've been planning to do when the year ends." "Luther Kane," Clara said, and Ethan's head snapped toward her in shock. "You think I didn't figure it out? A man like you hunting something for 3 years, willing to marry a stranger for $5,000. Whatever Luther Kane did to you, it's the kind of wound that doesn't heal, the kind you can only answer with blood. How long have you known?" "Since the second week, maybe. Tom mentioned the name once, said he'd heard you asking about Kane in the town saloon, offering money for information. I asked around quietly, learned the story. Or enough of it, anyway. Claire's voice was gentle. Your brother? Your sister-in-law? The ambush in Santa Fe? I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Ethan couldn't speak, couldn't process the fact that she'd known, had known almost from the beginning, and had never said anything, never judged, never demanded he choose between her problems and his quest for revenge. When this is over, Clara continued, when Marcus is safe and the ranch is secure, if you need to go, if you need to finish what you started with Kane, I'll understand. I'll even help, if you'll let me. Because that's what partners do. The words hit him like a physical blow, forcing him to confront a truth he'd been avoiding for months now. Somewhere between the barn fire and the shooting lessons, between the morning coffee and the quiet evenings going over ledgers, Clara had stopped being a client and become something infinitely more complicated. She was his partner, yes. His ally, his... He couldn't finish the thought. Not yet. Not when they were riding toward violence and uncertainty. Not when everything could still fall apart. But the feeling was there, undeniable and terrifying, growing stronger with every passing day. They reached the ranch near midnight, exhausted and worried, the weight of Monday's trial hanging over them like an executioner's blade. Samuel met them in the yard, took one look at their faces and asked no questions, just nodded and retreated to the bunkhouse to give them privacy. Ethan and Clara stood by their horses in the darkness, the space between them charged with everything unsaid, everything changing, everything they were too afraid or too cautious to name. I meant what I said, Clara said quietly, about facing this together, about understanding if you need to leave. I don't want you to feel trapped here, Ethan. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, and I know it's become more complicated than either of us planned. Complicated doesn't begin to cover it, Ethan admitted. 6 months ago, I would have walked into that jail and shot Hartwell in the head without blinking. Wouldn't have cared about consequences or trials or anything except removing the threat. But now, he stopped, struggling with words that didn't come easily. Now I care what you think. Care whether you'll see me differently if I cross certain lines. Care about what happens to this ranch and these people and to you. Clara stepped closer, close enough that he could see the starlight reflected in her eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of her in the cold night air. Then we'll find another way. A way that doesn't turn you into something you'll hate, that doesn't destroy what we've built here. Together, Ethan. We'll do it together. She reached out and took his hand, the gesture simple and profound. A promise and a prayer wrapped up in physical touch. Ethan looked down at their joined hands, calloused and work-hardened. The hands of two people who'd learned to survive through strength and stubbornness and sheer refusal to surrender. 4 days until the trial. 4 days to save Marcus, expose Hartwell, and find a way through this that didn't end with blood on the jail floor and more ghosts to haunt his dreams. 4 days to prove that maybe, just maybe, there was more than one way to fight, more than one path to justice. 4 days to discover whether the man he'd become could find his way back to the man he'd once been, before loss and rage had turned him into something feared rather than loved. It seemed impossible. But standing there in the darkness with Clara's hand in his, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in 3 long years. The fragile, dangerous, absolutely terrifying possibility of hope. And for the first time since his brother's death, he wasn't sure whether that hope would save him or destroy him. The hope lasted until dawn, when a rider came thundering up the ranch road with news that changed everything. It was Johnny Pierce, face pale and streaked with trail dust, his horse lathered and blowing hard from being pushed too fast for too long. Ethan was already reaching for his gun when the boy practically fell from the saddle, stumbling toward where Clara and Ethan stood on the porch, drinking their morning coffee. "It's Marcus," Johnny gasped. "They moved up the trial. It's happening today, this morning, in 2 hours. Sheriff sent word to the ranch, said if you want to be there, you better ride now." Clara's coffee cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the porch boards, the sound sharp and final. "Today? They can't. We were supposed to have until Monday." Hartwell pushed it through, got some judge from Carson City, convinced him there was risk of violence if they waited. Johnny was breathing hard, hands shaking. "Samuel sent me ahead. He and the others are saddling up now, but Miss Clara, Even if we ride hard, we might not make it in time. Ethan was already moving, his mind racing through calculations and possibilities, all of them bad. 2 hours meant Hartwell had planned this perfectly, had given them just enough notice to arrive breathless and unprepared, without time to gather evidence or secure a proper lawyer. It was the execution dressed up as justice, and they were being invited to watch. "Saddle my horse," he told Johnny, "and Clara's. Now." The boy ran for the stables while Ethan turned to Clara, seeing his own fury and fear reflected in her eyes. She'd changed in that instant, her face going hard and determined, the woman who'd proposed marriage to a killer resurfacing in full force. "We need leverage," she said quietly, "something to stop this trial, or at least force a delay. Evidence, witnesses, something Hartwell can't dismiss or threaten into silence." "We don't have time for evidence." Ethan's jaw tightened. "But we might have time for something else, something that'll make Hartwell wish he'd waited until Monday." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that every man has secrets he'd rather keep buried. Hartwell's gotten comfortable, gotten arrogant. Men like that always have bodies hidden somewhere, figuratively if not literally. We find those bodies, we drag them into the light, and suddenly he's got bigger problems than framing ranch hands." Clara's eyes widened. "You want to blackmail him, right there in the courtroom." "I want to give him a choice. Drop the charges against Marcus, or watch his whole carefully constructed life come apart." Ethan grabbed his coat and gun belt from inside the house. "But we need information fast, and we need it from someone who knows where Hartwell's vulnerable." "The banker who handles his accounts," Clara said immediately. "Thomas Brennan at the Merchants Bank. He and my father were friends. He hated when Hartwell started squeezing us. He might talk if we push him right." They were mounted and riding before the sun fully cleared the horizon, pushing their horses hard along the road to Silver Ridge. Samuel and the other hands caught up to them halfway there, all of them armed and grim-faced, looking more like a war party than ranch employees. "Whatever happens in that courtroom," Samuel said, riding up beside Ethan, "we stand with you, all of us. Marcus is family, and family doesn't let family hang for crimes they didn't commit." Ethan nodded, something tight in his throat making words difficult. These men, these loyal, brave, foolish men, were ready to risk everything for one of their own. It was the kind of loyalty he'd thought died with his brother, the kind he'd convinced himself didn't exist outside of blood family. Being wrong had never felt quite like this. They reached Silver Ridge with 40 minutes to spare before the trial. The town was already gathering, drawn by the spectacle of a hanging trial, by the gossip about the Whitmore ranch and its mysterious new owner. Ethan could feel the weight of their stares as he and Clara dismounted, could hear the whispers following them up the courthouse steps. "You go to the trial," Ethan told Clara quietly. "Make a scene, demand delays, challenge every piece of evidence they present. Make them work for it. Buy me time." "Time for what?" "Time to have a conversation with Thomas Brennan. One way or another, we're walking out of here with Marcus today." Clara gripped his hand briefly, her fingers cold despite the morning warmth. "Be careful. Hartwell's already proven he'll kill to get what he wants." "So have I." Ethan squeezed her hand once, then released it and turned toward the Merchants Bank 2 blocks south. "I'll meet you at the courthouse. And Clara, don't let them start without me." He didn't wait for her response, just moved through the gathering crowd with the purposeful stride of a man on a mission. The Merchants Bank was a modest building compared to Hartwell's grand establishment, but it had the solid, respectable air of old money and careful management. Thomas Brennan looked up from his desk when Ethan entered, his elderly face creasing with worry when he recognized his visitor. "Mr. Cole, I heard about Marcus. I'm sorry, I truly am, but I can't help." "Yes, you can." Ethan closed the door behind him and turned the lock with a deliberate click. "And you will, because you're a decent man who watched Hartwell destroy good people long enough that it's eating you alive. I can see it in your eyes, Brennan, the guilt, the shame of staying silent." Brennan's hands trembled as he set down his pen. "You don't understand. Hartwell controls half the money in this territory. If I speak against him, I lose everything. My bank, my reputation, Your soul?" Ethan moved closer, his voice dropping to something just above a whisper. "Because that's what you're trading, old man. You're trading your soul for security, watching innocent men hang so you can sleep in a comfortable bed. How's that working out for you? You sleeping well lately? What do you want from me? Brennan's voice cracked. I don't have proof of anything. Everything Hartwell does is technically legal, even if it's morally bankrupt. Technically legal isn't the same as clean. A man like Hartwell, with that much power and that much ambition, he's got dirt somewhere. Maybe it's bribes to government officials. Maybe it's falsified loan documents. Maybe it's something darker. Ethan leaned on the desk, his eyes boring into Brennan's. You handle finances for half the businesses in Silver Ridge. You see money moving in ways that don't add up. Tell me what Hartwell's hiding. Brennan looked at Ethan for a long moment, some kind of internal war playing out behind his watery eyes. Then he sighed, the sound of a man who'd been holding his breath for years and finally couldn't anymore. There's a mine, he said quietly, the Silver Star, about 15 miles north of town. Hartwell bought it 2 years ago through a shell company, paid almost nothing because everyone knew the silver was tapped out. But 6 months ago, he started moving large sums of money through accounts connected to that mine, paying workers, buying equipment, shipping ore to refineries in Sacramento. So he found a new vein. What's the scandal? The scandal is that the land the mine sits on belongs to the federal government. It was supposed to be sold at public auction this spring, but the auction keeps getting delayed. Hartwell's been mining federal land illegally for 6 months, making a fortune off silver that belongs to the American people. Brennan's hands shook harder now. If the territorial governor found out, or if anyone reported it to the federal land office, Hartwell would face criminal charges. Prison time, not just fines. Ethan felt a cold smile spread across his face. How do you know about this? Because I handle his books when his regular accountant is overwhelmed. I've seen the shipping receipts, the refinery payments, all of it coded under different company names, but traceable if someone knows what to look for. Brennan pulled out a key, unlocked a drawer in his desk, and withdrew a ledger. I made copies. Insurance, in case Hartwell ever turned on me. I never thought I'd actually use them. You're using them now. Ethan took the ledger, flipping through pages of dates and figures that would mean nothing to most people, but would be damning in the right hands. This enough to prove illegal mining? More than enough. Those shipping receipts alone prove ore coming from federal land. Combined with the payroll records showing workers at the Silver Star mine, it's an open and shut case of theft from the federal government. Ethan tucked the ledger inside his coat. You just became a hero, Brennan, or a dead man, depending on how this plays out. Either way, you can't stay in Silver Ridge after this. Hartwell will know where the information came from. I know. Brennan's voice was surprisingly steady. I'm 73 years old, Mr. Cole. I've got maybe 10 good years left if I'm lucky. I'd rather spend them able to look myself in the mirror than spend them rich and ashamed. Besides, I've got a sister in San Francisco who's been begging me to retire there for years. Might be time to take her up on it. Smart man. Ethan headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, what you just did might save an innocent life. That's worth more than all of Hartwell's silver. He left Brennan sitting at his desk looking both terrified and relieved, the expression of a man who'd finally laid down a burden he'd been carrying too long. The courthouse was packed when Ethan arrived, every seat filled and people standing along the walls, all of them eager for the spectacle of justice being served. Except it wasn't justice waiting in that courtroom. It was a lynching with legal paperwork. Clara sat in the front row, her back rigid with tension, flanked by Samuel and the other ranch hands. Marcus stood at the defendant's table looking small and lost, no lawyer beside him, no one to speak in his defense except the truth that no one seemed interested in hearing. The judge, a thin man with the pinched expression of someone who'd convinced himself that following orders was the same as doing right, sat at the bench reviewing papers. Hartwell sat in the gallery wearing an expression of smug satisfaction, his hired guns positioned strategically around the room. When he saw Ethan enter, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or concern that his perfect plan was about to encounter an obstacle. Good. Let him worry. Ethan moved to the front of the courtroom, ignoring the bailiff's attempt to stop him, and placed the ledger on the prosecutor's table with a sound that echoed through the sudden silence. Your Honor, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Before this trial begins, there's evidence the court needs to see. evidence that directly impacts the credibility of the primary witness against Marcus Webb. The judge looked up, irritation creasing his features. Mr. Cole, I presume. I was told you might cause trouble. This court doesn't want to be complicit in a fraud, Ethan interrupted. That ledger contains proof that Raymond Hartwell has been conducting illegal mining operations on federal land for the past 6 months. Proof in the form of shipping receipts, refinery payments, and worker payroll, all traceable, all documented, all prosecutable under federal law. The courtroom erupted. Hartwell shot to his feet, his face going from smug to furious in an instant. That's a lie. A desperate fabrication by a man trying to save his criminal employee. Then you won't mind if the judge examines the evidence, Ethan said calmly. Unless you've got something to hide, Mr. Hartwell. Something worth framing an innocent man to protect. The judge was already reaching for the ledger, his expression shifting from irritation to interest. Where did you obtain this? From a reputable banker who's willing to testify to its authenticity, along with the original documents, which can be verified against territorial mining records and federal land office files. Ethan kept his eyes on Hartwell, watching the man's careful control start to crack. The question isn't where I got it, Your Honor. The question is why the primary witness against Marcus Webb would risk federal prosecution by framing a ranch hand for bank robbery. What's Marcus Webb worth protecting? What's he potentially seen or heard that would make him dangerous to a man conducting illegal operations? This is outrageous, Hartwell was nearly shouting now. Judge Morrison, I demand you dismiss this circus immediately. That ledger is clearly forged. The ledger has your signature on 17 different pages, Ethan said, along with the signatures of your mine foreman and your accountant. We can bring in handwriting experts if you'd like, or we can subpoena your accountant and ask him under oath whether these records are genuine. The judge was flipping through pages now, his expression growing more troubled with each entry he examined. These shipping receipts are dated and stamped by Sacramento refineries. That's not something easily forged. Because they're real. Clara stood, her voice ringing clear and strong. Your Honor, Marcus Webb worked for my father for 20 years. In that time, he rode all over this territory, including past the Silver Star mine. What if he saw something? Saw workers there when there shouldn't be any? Saw ore shipments from a supposedly tapped-out mine? What if he mentioned it to someone, and that someone realized Marcus was a witness to federal crimes? That's pure speculation, the prosecutor sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. He was looking at Hartwell with new wariness, probably calculating how fast he could distance himself from a case that was rapidly falling apart. Then let's test the speculation, Ethan said. Marcus, did you ever ride past the Silver Star mine? Marcus stood slowly, his face confused but hopeful. Yes, sir. Rode past it maybe 3 months back when I was tracking strays near the northern boundary. Saw men working there, thought it was strange since everyone said that mine was played out, mentioned it to Miss Clara's father, and he said to mind my own business that maybe Hartwell had found a new vein. Did you mention it to anyone else? Ethan pressed. Well, yeah. Talked about it at the saloon one night, wondering if there'd be jobs opening up if the mine was producing again. Had a whole conversation with some of the other hands about... Marcus stopped, understanding dawning across his face. That was 2 weeks before they accused me of robbery. 2 weeks before Hartwell's men started following me around town. The judge set down the ledger with a heavy thump. Mr. Hartwell, I'm going to need you to answer some questions under oath, starting with what operations you're currently conducting at the Silver Star mine and whether you've filed the proper claims with the Federal Land Office. I don't have to answer anything without my lawyer present. Hartwell's composure was crumbling fast, his voice going sharp with panic. And I demand you dismiss these charges against me immediately. That ledger is inadmissible, obtained through what I can only assume were illegal means. The ledger was provided voluntarily by a banker with knowledge of your financial activities, Ethan said. But if you want to talk about illegal means, let's discuss how you threatened Dr. Henderson into changing his testimony, or how you paid Sally Morrison to claim she never saw Marcus that day, or how you planted marked bills in Marcus's room at the boarding house. You can't prove any of that. I can prove the mining operation. That's enough to get federal investigators involved, and once they start digging, they'll find everything else. Ethan's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. Here's what's going to happen, Hartwell. You're going to tell this court that you made a mistake, that new evidence has come to light clearing Marcus Webb, and that you're withdrawing all charges. Then you're going to leave this courtroom and pray that I don't send this ledger to the territorial governor, along with a detailed account of every threat you've made, every witness you've intimidated, and every law you've broken. And if I refuse, then I send the ledger anyway, and you spend the next 10 years in federal prison explaining to a judge why you thought stealing from the government was a good idea. Ethan smiled without humor. Your choice, but choose fast because my patience is running thin. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, every person present holding their breath as they watched a powerful man's empire crumble before their eyes. Hartwell's face cycled through rage, fear, calculation, and finally defeat. He was beaten, and he knew it, caught between federal prosecution and losing his leverage over the Whitmore ranch. Your Honor, he said finally, his voice tight and controlled, I believe there may have been an error in the investigation. New information has come to my attention that suggests Marcus Webb may not have been involved in the robbery after all. I'd like to request a dismissal of all charges pending further investigation. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers and exclamations. The judge gavelled for order, his expression caught between relief and suspicion. Mr. Hartwell, are you certain? This is highly irregular. I'm certain. Justice must be served, even if it means admitting mistakes were made. Hartwell wouldn't look at Ethan or Clara, his gaze fixed on some point above the judge's head. I formally withdraw my complaint and request Marcus Webb be released immediately. The judge looked like he wanted to ask more questions, to dig deeper into what had just happened, but self-preservation won out over curiosity. He banged his gavel once. In light of the withdrawal of charges, Marcus Webb is hereby released. This court is adjourned. The courtroom exploded into chaos, people shouting questions, reporters scrambling for details. The spectators who'd come hoping for a hanging suddenly confronted with something far more interesting. Clara rushed to Marcus, embracing the older man as he stood there looking dazed and disbelieving. Samuel and the other hand surrounded them in a protective circle, their relief palpable. Ethan kept his eyes on Hartwell as the banker tried to slip out through the side door, his hired guns trailing behind him like kicked dogs. But Ethan was faster, intercepting him before he could escape. One more thing, Ethan said quietly, pitching his voice for Hartwell's ears alone. You go near the Whitmore ranch again, you threaten Clara or any of her people. You so much as look at that property wrong, and that ledger goes to every newspaper between here and Sacramento, along with testimony from the witnesses you threatened, the doctor you tried to buy off, and anyone else who's got a story to tell about Raymond Hartwell's business practices. We clear? Hartwell's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Crystal clear. Good. Now get out of my sight before I remember that 41 men have died by my hand and decide 42 has a nice ring to it. Hartwell left without another word, his shoulders hunched and his swagger gone. Ethan watched him disappear into the crowd, feeling the familiar cold satisfaction of a threat neutralized, an enemy defeated. But underneath that satisfaction was something new, something warm and unexpected. The knowledge that he'd won this fight without firing a shot, without adding another body to the count that haunted his dreams. Clara found him standing there, her face bright with relief and gratitude and something deeper that he wasn't ready to name. You did it! You saved him! We did it! Ethan gestured to where Marcus was being swarmed by well-wishers and ranch hands celebrating his freedom. You were the one who thought of Brennan, who knew where Hartwell was vulnerable. But you were the one who had the courage to use it. You could have just shot Hartwell, could have solved this the way you've solved every other problem in your life. But you didn't. You found another way. Clara's voice dropped lower, meant only for him. Why? Because you asked me to. Because you made me want to be someone who had another way. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the woman who'd transformed from desperate client to trusted partner to something infinitely more precious. Because somewhere in the last 6 months, I started caring more about what you think of me than I care about my reputation as a killer. Clara's eyes went bright with unshed tears. Ethan! Whatever she was going to say was interrupted by Marcus pushing through the crowd to grip Ethan's hand in both of his, pumping it enthusiastically. Mr. Cole, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life. Thank your boss. She's the one who wouldn't give up, who kept pushing even when it looked hopeless. Ethan extracted his hand gently. And maybe think about where you ride for the next few months. Just because Hartwell backed down today doesn't mean he won't hold a grudge. I'll be careful. We'll all be careful. Marcus's face sobered. But you should know, Mr. Cole, every man on that ranch would follow you into hell if you asked. What you did today, standing up to Hartwell like that, that's the kind of thing legends are made of. Ethan wanted to tell him that legends were just lies people told themselves to make sense of violence, that there was nothing heroic about blackmail and intimidation. But looking at Marcus's grateful face, at the ranch hands celebrating their foreman's freedom, at Clara standing beside him with pride and affection shining in her eyes, he couldn't quite bring himself to shatter the moment with harsh truths. They rode back to the ranch in triumph, Marcus reunited with his people, the hands singing bawdy songs about bankers getting their comeuppance. Clara rode beside Ethan at the front of the group, and though they didn't talk much, her presence felt different now, warmer, closer, charged with possibility. That night, after dinner had been eaten and toasts had been drunk and Marcus had been celebrated until he begged for mercy, Ethan found himself on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. He heard Clara's footsteps behind him, light and familiar, and felt her settle into the chair beside his. 6 months, she said quietly. We've been married 6 months, and somehow it feels like longer, like we've lived years in that time. Tends to happen when people keep trying to kill you. Ethan kept his tone light, but his chest felt tight. Makes time stretch in strange ways. Is that all it is? Just the danger making us feel closer than we are? No. The word came out before he could stop it, honest and raw. No, that's not all it is. Clara turned to look at him, and in the fading light her face was soft, hopeful, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness and everything to do with strength and courage and the kind of stubborn grace that made flowers grow in desert soil. Then what is it? She asked. This thing between us that's grown beyond the contract we signed, beyond the marriage that was supposed to be just for show. What are we, Ethan? He should have deflected, should have made a joke or changed the subject or reminded her that they still had 6 months left on their arrangement, should have protected himself the way he'd learned to protect himself from every other emotional threat, with distance and coldness and the refusal to let anyone matter enough to hurt him. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, feeling her fingers intertwine with his, calloused palm against calloused palm, two people who'd learned to survive by refusing to surrender. I don't know what we are, he admitted. I don't know how to do this, how to let myself feel things I swore I'd never feel again after I buried my brother. But I know that when Hartwell threatened you, I wanted to kill him more for that than for anything he did to Marcus. I know that these morning coffees and quiet evenings have become the best part of my day. And I know that the thought of leaving when this year is up, of taking that final payment and disappearing to hunt Luther Kane, that thought hurts in ways I didn't expect. Then don't leave. Clara's voice was steady, certain, fearless in the way she'd been fearless facing down Hartwell and barn fires and all the other threats that had come their way. Stay. Not because of the contract, not because you're being paid, but because you want to. Because this ranch, these people, this life, because maybe they could be enough. Maybe they could be home. I swore an oath, Ethan said, the words tasting like ash. I promised my brother I'd find Luther Kane, that I'd make him pay for what he did. How do I walk away from that? How do I choose a future when the past is still bleeding? I'm not asking you to forget your brother or abandon your oath. I'm asking you to consider whether revenge is really what he would have wanted for you. Clara squeezed his hand. You've spent 3 years hunting a ghost, Ethan. 3 years putting your life on hold, becoming someone you're not sure you even like, all in service of an oath made in grief and rage. What if there's another way to honor your brother's memory? What if living well, building something good, finding happiness? What if that's the revenge that matters? The words hit something deep in Ethan's chest, cracking open a truth he'd been avoiding since the day he'd stood over his brother's grave and sworn to make things right. David wouldn't have wanted this. Wouldn't have wanted Ethan to become a killer consumed by vengeance. Wouldn't have wanted him to sacrifice years of his life chasing a man who might already be dead or disappeared beyond finding.
David would have wanted him to live, to find joy, to build the kind of life they'd both dreamed about before an outlaw's bullet had shattered everything. "I'm scared," Ethan admitted, the confession costing him more than any violence ever had. "I'm scared that if I let myself want this, want you, I'll lose it the way I lost everything else. I'm scared that caring makes me weak, makes me vulnerable, makes me the kind of man who can be destroyed by loss. Caring doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Clara shifted closer, and Ethan could smell the lavender soap she used, could feel the warmth of her against the evening chill. "And yes, caring means you can be hurt, but it also means you can be happy, can be whole, can be more than just the sum of your scars and your reputation. Isn't that worth the risk?" Before Ethan could answer, before he could find words for the tangle of fear and hope and desperate longing that was tearing him apart, Clara leaned in and kissed him. It was gentle at first, tentative, a question more than a statement. But when Ethan's free hand came up to cup her face, when he kissed her back, with all the pent-up emotion he'd been holding at bay for months, it became something else entirely. A promise, a claiming, a door opening onto a future he'd convinced himself he could never have. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara rested her forehead against his. "Still scared?" "Terrified," Ethan admitted. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe being terrified means it matters enough to be worth protecting." They sat there in the darkness, hands intertwined, futures uncertain, but no longer solitary. Somewhere out there, Luther Kane still lived free. Somewhere out there, Hartwell was probably already planning his next move, his next revenge. Somewhere out there, the world was still dangerous and unforgiving and full of threats that no amount of courage or love could completely eliminate. But here, on this porch, with this woman beside him, and 6 months of partnership behind them, Ethan Cole allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than vengeance and survival. That maybe the marriage that had started as a business arrangement could become something real. That maybe the killer everyone feared could find his way back to being just a man trying to build a life worth living. It was a fragile hope, as delicate as desert flowers and just as precious. But as Clara's head came to rest on his shoulder and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, Ethan held on to that hope with everything he had. Because for the first time in 3 years, the future looked like something more than just blood and rage and the endless hunt for a ghost. It looked like morning coffee and quiet evenings, and the possibility of becoming someone his brother would be proud to know. And that, Ethan was beginning to realize, might be the most dangerous thing of all. Not to his enemies, but to the carefully constructed walls around his heart. Those walls came crashing down 3 weeks later when a rider arrived at dawn carrying news that would force Ethan to choose between the past that defined him and the future he was just beginning to imagine. The messenger was a young deputy from a town 2 territories over, his horse near collapse from hard riding. Ethan met him in the yard, already knowing from the man's urgency that whatever he carried wasn't good news. "Ethan Cole?" The deputy's hand shook as he extended a telegram. "This came through 3 relay stations to find you. Man who sent it said it was urgent, said you'd been looking for information on Luther Kane." The name hit Ethan like a fist to the gut. He took the telegram with fingers that had gone numb, aware of Clara emerging from the house behind him, of Samuel and the hands gathering at a respectful distance. The words on the paper were brief, brutal in their simplicity. "Luther Kane spotted in mining camp outside Silverton, Colorado, riding with 4 men, heavily armed. Local marshal says he's planning something big, maybe a bank job or payroll robbery. If you're still hunting him, now's your chance. Won't stay long. This is what you paid for. Don't waste it." The telegram was signed by a bounty hunter named Carson Mills, a man Ethan had paid $200 6 months ago to keep ears open for any whisper of Kane's whereabouts. $200 of the money Clara had given him, invested in the hunt that had consumed 3 years of his life. And now, finally, after all that time, after all those cold trails and dead ends, Luther Kane was within reach. "Ethan?" Clara's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What is it?" He handed her the telegram without speaking, watching her face as she read it. Saw the moment understanding hit, the way her expression shifted from confusion to comprehension to something that looked almost like grief. "Luther Kane," she said quietly,
After all this time, you found him.
He found himself, or got careless, doesn't matter which. Ethan's voice sounded strange to his own ears, distant and cold. The voice of the man he'd been before Clara and the ranch, and the dangerous hope of something better. Colorado's 10 days hard riding from here. If I leave now, push through, I can make it in 8.
And then what? You track him down, you kill him, and then what? Does it bring your brother back? Does it heal the wound that's been bleeding for 3 years? It finishes what I started. It honors the oath I swore. Ethan met her eyes, saw the pain there, and hated himself for putting it there. This is what you knew I'd have to do eventually. What we both knew was coming. I thought I knew. I thought I understood. Clara's hands crumpled the telegram. But that was before. Before you saved Marcus without killing anyone. Before you chose a different way. Before... She stopped, swallowed hard. Before I fell in love with you. The words hung in the morning air like smoke from a gun barrel, impossible to take back, changing everything. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, felt the careful control he'd maintained slipping away like water through his fingers. Clara, don't. She held up a hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears, but her voice steady. Don't tell me you feel the same way if you're just going to leave anyway. Don't make this harder than it already is. You have to go. I understand that. The oath, your brother, the need for closure, I understand all of it. Just promise me you'll come back. Promise me this isn't goodbye. Ethan wanted to make that promise. Wanted to tell her that of course he'd come back, that Colorado was just a detour on the way to a life they could build together. But the truth was harder and colder than that. The truth was that hunting Luther Kane meant walking into danger that might kill him, meant becoming again the man he'd been before Clara had shown him another way to live, meant risking everything they'd built for the ghost of vengeance that had haunted him since Santa Fe. I can't promise that, he said finally, the words tasting like betrayal. Kane's too dangerous, too smart. Going after him means there's a good chance I don't come back. And even if I do, even if I survive, I don't know if the man who comes back will be the one you fell in love with. Killing changes you, Clara. Even when it's justified, even when it's for all the right reasons, it still takes pieces of your soul you never get back. Then don't go. Clara stepped closer, her hands finding his, gripping tight like she could physically hold him there through will alone. Stay. Let Kane disappear back into whatever hole he's been hiding in. Choose this life, this ranch. Choose us over revenge. You know I can't do that. Why? Because of an oath made in grief 3 years ago? Because you think your brother would want you to sacrifice your happiness for vengeance? Clara's voice rose, anger and desperation bleeding through. Your brother is dead, Ethan. Nothing you do to Luther Kane will change that. But you're alive. You have a chance at a real future, a real family, a real life that's about more than just hunting and killing. Why isn't that enough? Because I don't know if I deserve it. The words burst out of Ethan before he could stop them, raw and honest and terrible. David was the good one, the kind one, the one who believed in second chances and redemption and all the things I stopped believing in when he died. He had a wife who loved him, a future planned out, everything to live for. And he's gone while I'm still here, and the only way I know how to make that mean something is to make sure the man who killed him pays for it. That's not making it mean something. That's just making sure you both stay dead, him in the ground, you in your grief. Clara's tears were falling now, tracking down her face in the early morning light. I'm not asking you to forget David or pretend his death doesn't matter. I'm asking you to honor his memory by living the kind of life he would have wanted for you, by being happy, by building something good instead of just destroying something evil. Ethan pulled his hands free from hers, turning away because he couldn't bear to see her face, couldn't bear to watch himself break her heart. I have to go, Clara. I have to finish this. It's the only way I know how to move forward. Then go. Her voice had gone flat, empty of everything except resignation. Take your horse, take whatever supplies you need. I won't stop you. But Ethan, if you ride out that gate chasing Luther Kane, don't expect me to be waiting here when you get back. I can't do that to myself. I can't spend however long it takes wondering if you're alive or dead, wondering if you chose revenge over me, wondering if I was ever really enough. The ultimatum hit him like a bullet, clean and devastating. Ethan turned back to face her, seeing the resolution in her tear-stained face, the strength it took to draw that line in the sand. You're asking me to choose between you and my brother's memory. I'm asking you to choose between a future and a ghost, between love and vengeance, between the man you've become and the man you were 3 years ago. Clara's voice shook, but didn't break. I love you, Ethan Cole. I love you enough to let you go if that's what you need. But I love myself too much to spend my life waiting for a man who might never come home, or who might come home so changed by violence that the person I love doesn't exist anymore. Ethan stood there in the yard, aware of the ranch hands tactfully disappearing, of the morning sun climbing higher, of his horse saddled and ready, because some part of him had already made this decision the moment he'd read the telegram. The divide between his old life and his new one had never felt wider, the choice never more impossible. He could see both paths stretching before him with terrible clarity. One led to Colorado, to Luther Kane, to the confrontation he'd been preparing for since the day he'd become a bounty hunter. That path was familiar, comfortable in its violence, requiring nothing from him except the skills he'd honed and the rage he'd nurtured. If he survived, he'd have his revenge. If he died, at least he'd die doing what he'd sworn to do. The other path led back to Clara, to the ranch, to morning coffee and quiet evenings, and the terrifying prospect of building a life that wasn't centered on death. That path was unknown, uncertain, requiring him to become someone he wasn't sure he knew how to be, someone capable of peace, of happiness, of letting the past rest so the future could breathe. I need time to think, he said finally. I can't just... Take all the time you need. Claire's voice was gentle despite her tears. But make your choice knowing this. I won't be your backup plan. I won't be the woman waiting patiently while you chase ghosts. If you leave for Colorado, you're choosing that path completely, and I'll respect that choice, even as it destroys me. But I'll also move forward with my life. I'll dissolve our marriage, I'll rebuild this ranch, and I'll find a way to be happy without you. She turned and walked back to the house, her spine straight and her head high, every inch the woman who'd proposed marriage to a killer and then taught him how to be something more. Ethan watched her go, feeling like his heart was being torn in two, feeling the weight of 3 years of rage and grief and carefully constructed purpose crashing against the fragile hope of 6 months learning how to live again. Samuel approached cautiously, his scarred face grave. Boy's waiting for a response to take back. What should I tell him? Ethan looked at the young deputy, still mounted and patient, waiting to carry word back to Carson Mills that the famous Ethan Cole was or wasn't coming for Luther Kane. Such a small thing, a simple yes or no, and yet it would determine the entire shape of the rest of his life. Tell him. Ethan stopped, the words catching in his throat. Tell him I need a day. I'll have an answer by tomorrow morning. Samuel nodded and went to relay the message. The deputy looked disappointed but accepting, probably used to bounty hunters who needed time to prepare for the hunt. He rode off toward town to wait, and Ethan was left alone in the yard with a choice that felt like dying either way. He spent the day riding the property lines, needing the familiar rhythm of his horse beneath him, the vast emptiness of the Nevada landscape to think in. He rode past the rebuilt barn, past the fence lines he'd helped mend, past the cattle that Clara had fought so hard to keep. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of the life they'd built together, the partnership that had somehow transformed into something deeper without either of them quite meaning for it to happen. But he also carried the weight of David's memory, of his sister-in-law's screams as Kane's men had dragged her away, of the oath he'd sworn over a grave in Santa Fe. That weight was familiar, solid, the anchor that had kept him moving forward when grief might otherwise have destroyed him. The sun was setting when Ethan finally returned to the ranch, his horse tired and his mind no clearer than it had been that morning. He found Marcus waiting by the corral, the older man's face thoughtful and kind. Miss Clara told us what's happening, Marcus said quietly. About Kane, about Colorado, about the choice you're facing. For what it's worth, I thought you should know something. What's that? Your brother, David, right? I never met him, never knew him. But I've spent 40 years working ranches, and I've seen a lot of men come and go. Good men, bad men, and everything in between. And I can tell you this with absolute certainty. Good men don't want their brothers to sacrifice their lives for revenge. Good men want their brothers to live, to find joy, to build something that lasts. You don't understand. Cain killed him in cold blood, murdered him for a payroll that didn't even— I understand perfectly, Marcus interrupted gently. I understand that evil men do evil things, and that sometimes those things destroy innocent people. But I also understand that letting that evil define the rest of your life, that's just letting them win twice. Once when they pulled the trigger, and again every day you choose vengeance over living. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to explain why it was different, why his oath mattered, why he couldn't just let Cain walk free while David lay in the ground. But the words wouldn't come, because somewhere deep down he knew Marcus was right. Knew that David, kind, forgiving David who'd believed in second chances, would be horrified to know what his death had turned Ethan into. She loves you, Marcus continued. Miss Clara, I've known her since she was a little girl following her daddy around the ranch, and I've never seen her look at anyone the way she looks at you, like you hung the moon and stars just for her. You ride off to Colorado, you might get your revenge, but you'll lose something infinitely more precious in the process. What if I stay and spend the rest of my life wondering if Cain's out there? What if I can't let it go, can't move past it? Then you work on it. Day by day, choice by choice, you work on letting the past be past so the future can be future. Marcus smiled sadly. Nobody said healing was easy, son. Nobody said choosing life over death would be simple. But I can promise you this. It's worth the effort. Because at the end of your days, when you're looking back on the life you lived, you won't regret the vengeance you didn't take. You'll regret the love you walked away from. Marcus left him there by the corral, and Ethan stood in the gathering darkness thinking about love and vengeance, about oaths and choices, about the kind of man he wanted to be when this night ended and tomorrow began. Clara found him an hour later, bringing coffee and a blanket against the evening chill. She didn't speak, just sat beside him on the corral fence, their shoulders touching in the quiet way that had become their language over 6 months of partnership. I've been thinking, Ethan said finally, about what David would want, what he'd say if he could see me now, see what I've become in the name of honoring his memory. And I think he'd be ashamed, not of the hunting or the killing when it was justified, but of the way I've let his death consume everything else, the way I've used his memory as an excuse to avoid living my own life. Ethan took a shaky breath. He used to say that the best revenge was building something beautiful in the face of ugliness, that the way to fight darkness was with light, not more darkness. Clara's hand found his in the darkness, intertwining their fingers. He sounds like he was a good man. He was. He was everything I'm not, patient, kind, believing the best of people even when they didn't deserve it. Ethan's voice cracked. And I've spent 3 years trying to avenge him in ways he would have hated, becoming someone he wouldn't recognize. All because I was too angry and hurt to see that honoring his memory didn't require me to destroy myself in the process. It's not too late to choose differently. It's never too late. Clara turned to face him, her eyes reflecting starlight. But Ethan, you have to make this choice for yourself, not for me. If you stay because you think it's what I want, you'll end up resenting me. You have to stay because it's what you want, because this life, this future, because it's enough. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the woman who'd been brave enough to propose marriage to a killer, strong enough to stand beside him through fires and trials and all the violence that came with his reputation. The woman who'd taught him how to fight with more than just guns, how to win without killing, how to be more than just the sum of his scars and his rage. I've been carrying David's death like a weight for 3 years, he said slowly, using it as armor against feeling anything, against letting anyone matter enough to hurt me. But somewhere along the way, you slipped past that armor. You made me care again, made me want things I thought I'd given up forever. And that terrifies me, Clara, because caring means vulnerability, and vulnerability means I could lose you the way I lost David. You could, Clara agreed softly. Loving someone is always a risk. Always a chance that the world will take them away and leave you broken. But Ethan, choosing not to love, choosing not to live, that's not protecting yourself. That's just a slower, lonelier way of dying. I know you're right. Ethan's hands were shaking now. 3 years of suppressed grief and fear and desperate longing finally breaking through. I don't know how to let him go. Don't know how to forgive myself for being alive when he's not. Don't know how to accept happiness when it feels like betraying his memory. Clara slipped off the fence and stood in front of him, her hands coming up to frame his face with infinite gentleness. David's gone, Ethan, and that's a tragedy, a wound that will never fully heal. But you're still here. You're still breathing, still capable of love and joy and building a life that honors his memory by being beautiful instead of brutal. That's not betrayal. That's the greatest tribute you could give him, proving that his death didn't destroy you, that you were strong enough to survive and still choose kindness over cruelty, love over vengeance. The tears came then, hot and unexpected. 3 years of grief that Ethan had locked away behind rage and determination, finally breaking free. Clara held him as he shook with sobs, her arms strong and steady around him, murmuring comfort into his hair while he mourned his brother properly for the first time since that terrible day in Santa Fe. When the storm finally passed, leaving Ethan wrung out and exhausted but somehow lighter, Clara pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. So what's it going to be, Ethan Cole? Colorado and Luther Kane? Or here with me, building something that your brother would be proud to see? Ethan thought about the telegram, about Carson Mills waiting for word, about Luther Kane living free somewhere in the Colorado mountains. He thought about the oath he'd sworn and the rage that had sustained him and the 3 years he'd spent hunting a ghost. Then he thought about morning coffee with Clara, about Marcus's gratitude and Samuel's respect, and the way the ranch hands had started calling him boss without irony, about the possibility of children someday, of growing old watching Nevada sunsets, of dying in a bed surrounded by people he loved instead of bleeding out in some dusty street over a vendetta. Send word to the deputy, he said quietly. Tell him Ethan Cole is done hunting. Tell him Luther Kane can rot in hell for all I care, because I've got better things to do with my life than chase ghosts. Clara's smile was like the sun coming up, brilliant and warm and full of promise. You're sure? Because once you make this choice, there's no going back. You're giving up your revenge, your oath, everything you've worked for. I'm not giving anything up. I'm choosing something better. Ethan pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. I'm choosing you. Choosing us. Choosing to honor David's memory by living the kind of life he would have wanted for me, full of love and purpose and something worth protecting that isn't just rage wrapped in justice. I love you, Clara whispered. I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too, and you're right. It's terrifying, but it's also the first thing that's felt right since David died. Ethan kissed her then, deep and slow and full of promise, sealing the choice he'd made with physical touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara's eyes were dancing with joy and relief, and something that looked almost like mischief. So, Mr. Cole, now that you're staying, I suppose we should discuss the terms of our revised arrangement. Revised arrangement? Well, our original contract specified separate bedrooms and a marriage in name only. But I'm thinking, given recent developments, those terms might need renegotiation. Clara's smile was pure feminine satisfaction. What do you say to making this a real marriage, in every sense of the word? Ethan felt his own smile breaking free, genuine and unguarded in a way he hadn't allowed himself in years. I'd say that sounds like the best deal you've ever offered me, Mrs. Cole. Though I should warn you, I'm hell on negotiations, might demand very favorable terms. Demand away. I'm a generous woman when properly motivated. Clara took his hand and started pulling him toward the house. Come on, we've got 6 months of pretending to make up for, and I'm not wasting another minute. They spent that night discovering each other in ways the contract had never allowed, tearing down the last walls between them with touches and whispers and the kind of intimacy that turned a business arrangement into something sacred. And when morning came, Ethan woke with Clara in his arms, sunlight streaming through the window, and felt peace settle over him like a blessing. The deputy came by late morning for Ethan's answer. He took the news that Ethan Cole was retiring from bounty hunting with visible disappointment, probably hoping for stories to tell about riding with the famous killer. But he carried the message back to Carson Mills, along with the $200 Ethan had originally paid for information, now returned with a note saying the debt was settled and the hunt was over. In the weeks that followed, life at the Whitmore ranch settled into a new rhythm. The marriage that had started as desperate convenience became something real and deep and rooted in daily partnership. Ethan taught Clara to shoot like a professional, and she taught him the intricacies of ranch management. They rebuilt not just the barn, but the ranch's reputation, word spreading that the Whitmore operation was thriving under new leadership. Hartwell tried twice more to cause trouble, once by spreading rumors about Ethan's violent past, once by attempting to call in alone early. Both times, Clara faced him down with the calm certainty of a woman who knew she had the law, the ledger evidence, and a dangerous husband on her side. Eventually, Hartwell gave up and turned his attention to easier targets. His power diminished, and his reputation tarnished. Marcus became foreman officially once he'd fully healed, running the day-to-day operations with the wisdom of 40 years' experience. Samuel took over training new hands, teaching them the Whitmore way of running cattle and standing up to threats. The ranch prospered, grew, became known throughout Nevada as a place where honest work was rewarded and loyalty was valued above all else. And Ethan learned how to live again, how to laugh at Samuel's terrible jokes and appreciate morning coffee and find satisfaction in hard work that built things instead of destroying them. The nightmares about David's death didn't disappear entirely, but they came less frequently, their edges softened by Clara's presence and the daily proof that choosing life over vengeance had been the right decision. 2 years after that telegram arrived offering him Luther Kane, Ethan was fixing fence in the north pasture when Samuel rode up with news from town. Luther Kane had been killed in a shootout with federal marshals outside Denver, shot down while trying to rob a train payroll. The outlaw who'd haunted Ethan's dreams for 3 years was dead, brought to justice without Ethan having to lift a finger. When Clara heard the news that evening, she found Ethan on the porch staring out at the sunset. "How do you feel?" she asked quietly. "I don't know. Relieved, maybe? Guilty that I'm not more angry about someone else finishing what I started?" Ethan shook his head. "Mostly I just feel grateful that I wasn't the one to pull the trigger, that I get to go to bed tonight next to you, with clean hands and a clear conscience. No regrets about giving up the hunt? Not a single one." Ethan pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "David got justice. Kane's dead. And I got to keep my soul and build a life that actually matters. That's more than I ever expected when I buried my brother in Santa Fe." Clara tilted her face up to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of the comfortable intimacy of 2 years' marriage. "Your brother would be proud of you, you know, of the man you've become, the life you've built. I'm certainly proud of you." "I'm proud of us," Ethan corrected, "of what we built together. This ranch, this life, this family we're creating, none of it would exist if you hadn't been brave enough to propose marriage to a killer and stubborn enough to believe he could become something more." They stood together as the sun set over their land, painting the Nevada sky in shades of amber and rose and gold. In the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied, and the ranch hummed with the sounds of honest work and good people living good lives. 5 years later, standing on that same porch with their twin daughters playing in the yard and a son on the way, Ethan would reflect on the choice he'd made that desperate morning when the telegram arrived. He'd chosen Clara over vengeance, chosen life over death, chosen to honor his brother's memory by building something beautiful instead of destroying something evil. It was, he would think, the best decision he'd ever made. Better than any shot he'd fired, any criminal he'd captured, any reputation he'd built. Because this life full of love and laughter, and the daily satisfaction of meaningful work, this was what David would have wanted for him all along. The marriage that had started as a lie became the truest thing in Ethan's life. The contract that was supposed to last 1 year became a partnership that would span decades. And the killer who everyone feared became simply a husband, a father, a rancher who'd learned that the strongest form of courage wasn't pulling a trigger, but choosing to live fully in the face of loss. Clara had been right that night by the corral, when she'd challenged him to choose between the past and the future. Loving someone was always a risk, always a chance that the world would take them away and leave you broken. But choosing not to love, choosing not to live, that was just a slower, lonelier way of dying.
Ethan Cole had died the day his brother was murdered, but somewhere between the desperate proposal and the barn fire, between the trial and the telegram, between the rage and the redemption, he'd found his way back to living. Found his way back to being someone who could love without fear, build without destroying, and honor the dead by refusing to join them before his time. The sun set on the Whitmore ranch, now the Cole Ranch in legal documents, but still Whitmore in the hearts of everyone who worked it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new opportunities to choose between the easy violence and the harder peace. But Ethan would face those challenges with Clara beside him, with family around him, with the knowledge that he'd chosen the right path when the telegram offered him everything he thought he wanted, because revenge was empty, justice was cold. But love was warm and messy and complicated and absolutely worth every risk, every fear, every moment of vulnerability it required. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered, the only truth worth building a life around. The marriage had never been fake. Ethan's heart had known the truth long before his head accepted it. From that first handshake in the restaurant, through every shared danger and quiet evening, his heart had been choosing Clara even when he'd convinced himself it was just business. Now, watching the woman he loved call their daughters in for dinner, feeling the weight of the future pressing down with promise instead of dread, Ethan Cole finally understood what his brother had tried to tell him years ago, before an outlaw's bullet had stolen him away. The best revenge against darkness wasn't more darkness. It was building a life so full of light that the shadows had nowhere left to hide. It was loving fiercely and completely, building something that would outlast both the builders and the destroyers, leaving the world better than you found it through the simple act of choosing hope over hatred. Ethan had spent 3 years learning how to kill. It had taken Clara and a year of pretend marriage to teach him something infinitely more valuable: how to live, how to love, how to be the kind of man who deserved the second chance he'd been given. As the stars began to appear in the darkening Nevada sky, Ethan Cole, once feared bounty hunter, now simply a husband and father and rancher, went inside to join his family for dinner. The telegram that had offered him Luther Kane was long since burned, its ashes scattered to the wind. The oath he'd sworn over his brother's grave had been fulfilled not through violence but through the daily choice to honor David's memory by being happy. And if sometimes, late at night, Ethan still heard his brother's voice in his dreams, it wasn't screaming in pain or demanding vengeance. It was laughing with joy at the life Ethan had built, the love he'd found, the man he'd become when he'd finally laid down his guns and picked up something infinitely more powerful: hope. The story that had begun with a desperate proposal and a killer's cold calculation ended with love and family and the kind of peace that could only be earned through choosing it, day after day, over every other option. It was, Ethan thought, as Clara's hand found his across the dinner table, the only ending that ever really mattered. The only ending worth fighting for. The only ending that honored both the dead and the living by proving that love, in the end, was always stronger than hate. Always.